My radio came to life as sound crackled through the speakers. Immediate assistance needed at the park on Grand Avenue. Unidentified woman attacked and in critical condition. Grand Avenue was only a couple of blocks away. I turned the car's ignition on and picked up the radio while clicking the side button. Copy that. On my way now. Any information as to the nature of the attack? That's a negative, was the distorted reply. I backed the car out onto the road and made the short journey to Grand Avenue. Even from the distance, I could hear the wail of other first responders quickly heading over there as well. Whatever the problem was, it seemed to be big. After a few minutes, I pulled up to the scene and with a quick flash of my badge, crossed the police tape. I made my way past the ambulances and other first responder vehicles to where a group of people dressed in their correlating uniforms stood huddled around a singular area. A police officer looked back and seemed to recognize me, probably from the academy, and stepped back to let me take a glimpse of what was causing the commotion. I whistled through my teeth. There was a woman lying on the floor. Well, the only way I knew it was a woman was because I was told so. The woman that laid before me was so disfigured, it was impossible to tell what she actually looked like. She was covered in thousands of toothpicks, every single one embedded deeply into her skin. Streams of blood flowed through each incision, coating her entire body red and covering the ground near her. And yet she was still alive. She was very obviously and painfully breathing every couple of seconds. A nearby paramedic informed me that it wouldn't be the case for much longer. We can't move her. It just drives the toothpicks into her skin further, which increases the problem. We can't remove them either, he said solemnly. Why not? I asked. He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw the fear in his face. That's just it. We can't. The toothpicks all have a barbed spike on the tip, meaning the only direction they move is downwards, and we don't want that. We've tried to insert a catheter to induce artificial respiration, but we can't get that in. He gestured wildly towards the woman. There are toothpicks up her damn nose. I stared at the woman a while longer. I looked at her chest heave as she struggled to take a breath before coming back down again, pushing the toothpicks further into her skin, which increased the already alarming rate of blood flow. I looked at the paramedics who were coming to the slow realization that this person was going to die a slow and painful death, and there was nothing they could do about it. I had seen many things in my career, but this took the cake. I used to pride myself on staying calm during any situation. I was able to stay stoic and take control of any situation, but this time was different. The brutality of the attack made my insides feel like a swirling mess, threatening to spill out of my mouth if I wasn't careful. Everything about this just seemed so wrong. The human body wasn't built to be treated like that. There was an internal instinct to run away from this, stemming from a primal fear ingrained into my brain. But I couldn't. While the situation filled me with such a fear of the unknown, I had to stay. I had a job to do, after all. I turned back to the paramedic. How was she found? He sighed. Exactly like she is now. A passerby called emergency services. We've tried to help her in any way we could, but he trailed off the end of his sentence, his gaze shifting into the distance. Is there anything else I should know? I asked. He looked back at me, but not directly. His eyes appeared foggy and seemed to linger at a faraway point without really comprehending what he was looking at. Grief, I assumed. Yeah, there were a couple of items found beside the body, he finally said. He left to go get it and came back with both a small piece of folded paper in his hands and a small silver wristwatch, which he passed on to me. The watch caught my attention. It seemed familiar. Well, I suppose all silver chain link watches with 3 faces looked the same, but this one seemed different. Somehow, the weight and the feeling of metal against my palm seemed to awaken a long-forgotten memory in the back of my mind. I could see myself holding this watch years ago and sliding it onto my wrist, or someone else's. I turned the watch over. 2 simple letters were engraved on the backside of the watch face. 2 simple letters that made the color drain out of my face and made the world seem as if it was collapsing on top of me. 2 letters that I had put there 6 years ago. Alice Edwards, my sister. She was presumed missing over 3 years ago after she left her house to go for a nighttime jog and never came back, leaving behind a grieving husband and a 4-year-old daughter. The search was given up eventually. There was no leads and no witnesses. How do you begin to find someone who's vanished? With my mind clouding up with questions, I made my way back to the body. I forced myself to look past the blood and the toothpicks and the sight of mutilated flesh. I looked at the eyes, the only part of the body not completely covered in toothpicks, and collapsed into fits of tears, because in that moment I knew the eyes were bloodshot and lifeless, but I had seen all I needed to. The woman on the ground before me was my sister. I thought she was dead, and now I had seen her die, without even knowing her true identity. I turned my gaze away from her, and from all the others. All of these events were too much to process, and I knew I had to leave the scene, or risk having a breakdown. In that moment the pain was too great, and the tears too strong. I nodded to the policeman guarding the tape, and crossed it once more. As I left, I became aware of a piece of folded paper in my hands, given to me by the paramedic, as it was also found near the body. I opened it up. What do you think of my little hedgehog? If you like this, don't worry. My zoo has only just begun. When you're in the business, as long as I've been, you're bound to see some messed up stuff. Trust me, I've seen it all. An unfaithful husband angering his wife to the point where she commits a murder-suicide. Check. A young woman pushed into the path of an incoming train by an obsessive stalker. Check. My sister bleeding to death after being pierced by thousands of toothpicks, which caused the killer to so aptly call her the human hedgehog. Check. As you can probably tell, it's that last case that I'm dealing with currently, trying to figure out how the hell the killer managed to get away with it. I mean, if you think about it, nothing adds up. For starters, the toothpicks had to have been inserted at a secondary location prior to her being transported and left for dead at the park where she was found, all without any witnesses. And then comes the question of the toothpicks themselves. The paramedics at the scene found it impossible to move her, as it would drive the toothpicks further into her skin, increasing the blood loss. How did the killer manage to do it? Well, I actually did have an answer for that question, but it was something I didn't want to think about. The toothpicks were probably inserted one at a time, over a period of several months, possibly years. Let the wound heal, and then move on to the next toothpick. Which brings me to my final dilemma. Why? What did the killer gain spending months of their time piercing the skin of my sister? Why was it my sister in the first place? I don't know of any reason it would be an act of revenge, so it may have been a murder of opportunity. Just pure chance it was my sister, which made it hurt even more. It was definitely a shock discovering she was still alive after all these years, and seeing how she was treated only added salt to the wound. I was grieving, yes, but the killer mentioned that my sister would only be the beginning, and so solving this case would be my utmost priority. I couldn't let this happen again. True grief could come later, and so I sat in my office, sliding my sister's watch over my wrist, and mulling over these facts, with the first step to discovering the killer currently in my hands. A day after the killings occurred, a birthday card containing an address was mailed directly to me. Forensic work indicated that the handwriting on it perfectly matched the note left at the crime scene. While getting a handwritten birthday card was interesting in itself, it still raised a lot more questions. How did the killer know I took up the case? Were they at the crime scene that night? Maybe they knew it was my sister that they had killed and were now targeting me. As usual, nothing made sense. But still, an address was an address. And in my line of work, you take notes like that very seriously. I thumbed over the birthday card again, looking at the cartoon giraffe telling me to have a tallsome day. Yeah, birthday card puns are strange. I analyzed the address inside again, looking at the word 12 Baker Street, as if they may have some hidden meaning that I hadn't discerned yet. Nothing came to me. It looked like the address was just that, an address. And so I coordinated with my supervisor to lead a team that evening down at Baker Street to see if we could find anything down there. I was secretly hoping that we wouldn't, and that this was just a wild goose chase, as I was terrified of what I would find down there if that was not the case. Later that evening, I showed up at 12 Baker Street with 3 of the finest men I knew. Thompson, a mountain of a man, who I knew firsthand could keep a level head in any situation. Ramirez, not physically impressive as Thompson, but he had the brains to make up for it. His quick wit was known to save many a cop from danger. And Edison, an analyst both in the field and out, he somehow finds a way to keep one eye on every detail. I picked the best of the best to deal with the worst of the worst. Baker Street itself was a row of warehouse buildings in the industrial district on the outskirts of town. All the warehouses were exactly the same, large, rectangular, and made up of red brick and mortar. Almost half of the warehouses were still in production, manufacturing different materials to be shipped across the globe, while the other half looked abandoned. 12 Baker Street was one of them. It had the signature, "There's nothing worth looking at here, look." Smashed windows, rubbish piled around the outside, bricks crumbling in a few odd spots, and doors set slightly of their hinges. But this was the place. I set my jaw and motioned to the others, while slowly making my way through the already open front door. It took a while for my eyes to adjust to the dark interior, as I was opposed to using a torch in that moment. I could hear the unmistakable sound of water dripping from the ceiling into a hollow object nearby. The air seemed thick and musty, smelling largely of wet cardboard and something more metallic. Blood, a tangy smell that quickly invades the nostrils while leaving no room for other smells. I pushed on, my crew keeping pace behind me. Edison looked at me with a raised eyebrow, and I nodded to him in return. "This is the place," I had silently told him. "Be ready for anything." We passed through another set of doors and came into a room dimly lit by an overhead light. And in the middle of the room, basking in the light, there was a person. And I say person very lightly. The average person has a neck 4 to 6 inches long, measuring from shoulder to chin. The person before me had a neck over 10 times that length. They were on their hands and feet, their neck sprouting from their shoulders like a vine and curling downwards. Their neck continued across the floor for about 5 more feet before ending with a neck attached to it. The person saw us and began to slowly shuffle towards us, slowly dragging their head and massive neck along with them. They moaned mournfully as they moved, and I could see trails of blood slowly pouring from what seemed to be stitches every couple of inches along their neck. As they moved forward, their blood fell to the ground, spilling in all directions and leaving a bright red trail wherever they went. The person groaned again and looked up at us, obviously in tremendous pain. "What the hell was that?" Ramirez said loudly from behind me. I kept my gaze focused towards the person, towards him, as closer inspection revealed. "I don't know. Another animal-themed abomination, by the looks of it." I stood my ground and watched, unsure of what to do, as he heaved his neck and the rest of his body towards us. They made eye contact with me and moved their mouth as if to speak, but all that came out were more ghastly groans. I understood what he was trying to say anyways, his mouth shaped like a circle and opening and closing, enunciating a one-syllable word: "Help." I stepped back, out of fear more than anything else. I knew that this thing couldn't necessarily do anything to harm me, but in the back of my mind alarm bells were going off. This is unnatural. People shouldn't look like that. You need to leave. No. I could sense my team behind me tensing up and shuffling backwards, probably going through the same thought process as I was. Fear is the primary motivator in a person, after all. The person continued to crawl forward, further extending the trail of blood behind him, his movements more slow and haggard. His life essence seemed to be dripping away from him, and it was obvious I was watching the final moments of someone tortured to the point of death. Once again, a voice began to speak. It emanated from above us, broken and distorted, probably coming from some sort of PA system. It was calm and somewhat cheerful in the way it spoke, as if everything going on was just a normal occurrence. "Welcome, all visitors, to the newest attraction to the human zoo." A lovely giraffe, created by slowly tearing apart pieces of his neck and replacing it with larger, more appropriate pieces of human flesh. I winced. That did not sound pretty. A slow process, yes, but look at the end result. Isn't he beautiful? Undoubtedly, much better than his original form. Wouldn't you agree, Jonathan? I looked up, almost instinctively. That was my name. Anyways, I just wanted to say a big thank you for volunteering a rather fine subject to add to my collection. I just know you'll enjoy the wonderful things I have in store for you. The voice stopped speaking, and I became aware of 2 things at once. A sharp, loud noise of metal striking metal that was over just as it began came from the far right-hand side, on the other side of the room. A gunshot, and to my left, Thompson's leg seemed to jerk backwards, causing him to keel over and fall on top of himself, blood spurting from an area just above his knee. A bullet wound. I did the one thing anyone faced with an unseen gunman in a room would do. Duck and dive for cover. Fear is a primary motivator, after all, and I was scared to death. I found myself behind a stack of boxes, which to my best guess was blocking the gunner's line of view. I stood still, chest heaving from adrenaline and fear, and assessed the situation. Thompson was lying on the ground, unmoving. He must have hit his head on the way down. Edison was directly to my right, having chosen the same pile of boxes to hide behind as me. Ramirez was unaccounted for, and we had a gunman on the loose. It wasn't looking good. And then the overhead light turned off. Nothing makes your heart beat faster than the panic of suddenly being thrust into darkness. I heard the patter of footsteps ahead of me, close to where Thompson lay. It could have been Ramirez, looking to help him, or the gunner, looking to finish the job. I hoped it was Ramirez. I heard more footsteps, heavier, louder, more than one person. I contemplated making a dash for Thompson, grabbing him, and getting the hell out of there, but he was too heavy for that. I turned to Edison to see if he had any idea what to do when the light turned back on. I looked at my surroundings. The giraffe man was on the floor, unmoving, dead or close to it. Ramirez was slumped over a box on the far side of the room, dead or close to it. Thompson was gone. The gunner was gone. Edison helped me carry Ramirez back to our vehicle. He had bruises all over his body from what looked to be a fist fight, but he was still breathing for the most part. I couldn't say the same for the giraffe man, however. We had the rest of the warehouse swept, but nothing came up at all. It had apparently been cleaned of all evidence beforehand in preparation of our arrival, or never even used at all. It was hard to fathom it all. I had lost Thompson and come back with a man with a 25 feet long neck instead. Thompson was out there, looking like God knows what. Ramirez was in the hospital, badly beaten. Edison was shaken up, understandably. I was scared. Everyone was scared. But it was the words spoken out of that system that bothered me the most. The way that they said the giraffe man's neck was made up of much larger pieces of human flesh, as if they had more humans with them. And judging by the size of the neck, a lot more than one. There were people still out there, besides Thompson. A lot more people. I should start this by saying I'm not a detective anymore. After the events at the warehouse, I was paged to visit my direct supervisor, Sergeant Langley. She was sitting behind a mahogany desk. When I came in, gazing at some sort of file, she looked up at me. "What the hell was that, Jonathan?" "We were underprepared, ma'am," I replied. She glared at me from across the room. "We have a man missing and a severe casualty. How underprepared were you? Did you not take any precautions at all?" "With all due respect, you weren't there, ma'am," I said, upset. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw down there. How would you expect someone to perform at their peak, faced with that? She sighed and looked down at the file, eyes skimming over the words. "The brass is asking I let you go, for the moment. You can't seriously think," I began to say. She held up a palm. "Look, the media is all over this. For everyone's sake, including you." She jabbed a finger at me. "It's best that you stay out of this for the time being." I stared at her. She stared back and raised an eyebrow. I considered my options and begrudgingly decided to hand over my badge and gun. Langley smiled again. "Look, this will all blow over soon. Just take a rest for a while." I didn't respond. I left her office. It was 12, and I had nothing to do besides worry about all that was going on. So I went home and slept. I was exhausted after the past few days, after all. I awoke to my doorbell ringing. I was in that half-asleep state, so I covered my head with a pillow, hoping that whoever it was would go away. The doorbell rang again. I shifted position in my bed and checked my watch. 4 o'clock. I was more tired than I thought. The doorbell rang again. I slowly got up and made my way to the door, brushing the sleep from my eyes. The door opened to reveal a scruffy-haired, lanky teenage kid who looked to be about 18. He nodded at me while smiling politely. "What do you want?" I said, not so politely. Yeah, I'm meant to drive you to this place. I mean, that is if you want to go," he said. I looked at him, trying to discern if he was serious or not. "And what's that supposed to mean?" He shrugged. "I'm not really sure. Someone came up to me and offered $500 to ask you to come with me. But you don't have to come, either. I've been told to say the decision is up to you." A look of remembrance flashed across his face. "Oh, yeah, I'm supposed to give this to you as well." He pulled a well-folded piece of paper out of his pocket and handed it to me. I opened it up and read the words scrawled inside. Heard you're out of work. You should come join my zoo. We're always in need of more zookeepers. The boy peered at me from behind the paper. So what is it then? Are you coming or not? I stared at him, blankly. What do I say? How does whoever wrote this note know I lost my job anyways? It only just happened. This is obviously a trap anyways. The kid could even be on it. The last time I followed one of these notes, I lost a man and almost got another killed. So what, then? Should I go or stay? I looked back at the kid. Yeah, I'm coming. The kid drove with that careful rigidness that all first-year drivers seem to have. He drove for a while, slowly taking me out of town and into the rural back areas of my city. It took another 30 minutes of driving along long stretches of road the land, becoming quieter and more desolate before he pulled up onto a gravel pathway, which seemed to be the entrance of a much larger farm. I looked at the sign as he drove me in. Winston's Family Orchard. The gravel pathway diverted further up the track, and he took the right road. It ended up at what looked to be a farmhouse. There were lights on inside, and I heard the whir of machinery in the massive shed behind it. The kid stopped the car. This is your stop. Hope you have a great evening, sir, he cheerfully said, allowing me enough time to get out of the car before he drove back down the pathway. I watched him until the headlights dipped below the horizon before making my way up the steps and onto the veranda. I could hear voices inside the house, talking, laughing. It sounded like any house at dinner time. Unsure of what to do, I knocked at the door. The voices stopped. I heard the soft pad of someone walking barefoot on hardwood towards me. The door opened. A man came out from behind it. He was of average height, cropped hair, and with 3-day stubble beginning to show. He stared at me with a faraway look in his eyes, before smiling and gesturing for me to come in. Glad you could make it. Dinner is just ready. Why don't you come join us? His voice was deep and intoned, and familiar. Very familiar. I know you, I said, more of an accusation than a fact. I thought back to the memories of the night I found my sister, the paramedic who passed me the note that started all of this. A paramedic who always seemed to be gazing off into the distance. No, not just gazing, searching. He tilted his head slightly. Well, I'm happy to hear that. Makes acquaintances a bit more easier. Then, come on, you look hungry, let's eat. I didn't move. I'm not going to eat with you. I yelled at him. You killed my sister. He looked at me questioningly. No, I didn't. I'm just a keeper. You've got this all wrong. Shit, I don't give a damn what you have to say. I retorted. Hey, buddy, let's calm down and talk this over a meal. I'm serious. Come and join us. And with that he walked back down the hallway. He turned left into what I assumed was the dining room. I heard a couple of hushed voices and scraping chairs. It seemed people were leaving. I had two options. I could go in and find out what was going on, or I could leave and forget about all of this. There was one problem, however. I would never be able to forget. The pain would never go away. The horrors of what I saw could not be forgotten. I walked inside. I entered the room I saw the paramedic go through. Inside there was a table, set like it was ready to feed a large family. There was a roast lamb in the middle, with a few cuts already sliced from it. Around it there was various side dishes and drinks. There was a man seated at the head of the table, directly opposite to where I was. It seemed everyone else had left. The man spoke. His voice was rich and pronounced. Isn't it great that we can finally meet, Jonathan? I have so much that I would like to tell you. And who are you? I asked. He chuckled. All in due time. He waved his hand at me. Come, sit. Anything you'd like. I do recommend the steamed asparagus. However, Ani really outdid herself there. I remained standing. He seemed unfazed and continued to speak. Now, I would like to remind you that you came here of your own accord, and you may leave whenever you feel like. We are not forcing you to stay here, but I so would enjoy your company. He leaned back in his chair and folded his arms across his stomach. Now, before I start waffling on, is there any questions you would like to ask? Any burning thing you would like to know? It didn't take me long to think of a question. Why'd you do it? Why did you kill all these people? He paused for a moment, seemingly disappointed. Straight to those questions. Are we? He sighed. Look around at the world. What do you see? All I see is death. You, of all people, should know that. People die all the time. Hundreds a second. Thousands a minute. So what does it matter that I take a few more lives? It's just a drop in the bucket of death. He stood up And when people die, it's useless. Everything that they've ever done amounts to nothing in the void of eternity. But it's not just that. As a species, we are bringing ourselves closer to death every day. We cannot make the right choices, ever. So, on behalf of all of us, I'm choosing. I shook my head in disbelief. Choosing what? You're just torturing people to the point of death. How is that supposed to solve anything? Do you still not yet understand? His voice rose. I am saving us all. I am leading the charge in the evolution of our species. In due time, I will be revered all around the world as the one person who saw what was right and had the guts to do it. He turned around to face me. The first few deaths were unfortunate, yes, but they have helped the cause beyond anything you can dream of. I am so close to creating the perfect being, the savior of our species. He looked at me, jabbing a finger in my direction. And you will join me, become a keeper, and embrace the new world. I was silent for a while. This guy is insane. I thought, join him. Who the hell does he think he is? I'm leaving the first chance I get. But I had one more question I wanted to ask him. Why me? Out of all the people you could have chosen, why me? He smiled widely and let out a low laugh. All of these smarts, and yet you couldn't figure that out. I didn't choose you. Look at you, quivering in a corner. There are so many more suitable prospects than you, he said with a hint of disgust. Now tell me, what makes you think I'd choose you? I don't know. The note's my sister. You just seem to be interested in me, I said. He chuckled again. You really don't know, do you? Tell me. How often would your sister go for a walk at midnight? I'm not sure. Never, I suppose. Then what was she doing that night? The question struck me as odd. I had never thought about what she was doing, only about how it happened. I could never figure it out. The only way it seemed possible for her to disappear was if she had let it happen. But I ruled that one out early. She wouldn't just let herself get kidnapped, right? Right. The man arched an eyebrow at my silence. You deserve the truth. Everyone does. Some people like to hide their secrets behind shadows and dark corners, praying they don't see the light of the day. I am not one of them. I strive to be open and honest in all that I do. I long for a world with no lies, because there is nothing to lie about. Everyone is accepted. Everyone is valued. If you need proof, have I not told you my exact location twice now? That's hardly fair. You shot at us the first time. I said, I did not shoot at you. You were just there. Look, I will explain to you everything. But first, I require something of you. He picked up a mug and started sipping at it. Your loyalty. Tell me, Jonathan, will you join me? You're out of your mind if you think I want any part of this, I said, resolutely. A smile curled at the edge of his lips. A pity. His eyes traveled down my body, seemingly gazing at everything. Look at you, always slithering into situations you shouldn't have to be in. I think you'll make a fine snake. I heard a shuffle behind me and turned around just in time to see a metal bar being swung at my face. It connected with my forehead with a loud crack, sending me flying backwards onto the ground. Pain. That was the first thing I remember from when I woke up. Hot, searing pain, burning throughout my body and culminating in my forehead. Pain. A throbbing sensation that shook my body with every strangely prominent beat of my heart, blurring my vision and deafening my eardrums. Pain. The metal floor was cold beneath me, drenched in my sweat. My arms were held down by some sort of shackle on each side, limiting my movement. I was trapped with a killer. I panicked. I thrashed my arms against the shackles, on the blind hope that I'd be able to free myself. The pain on my arm increased and probably caused a bruise. I yelled out in pain, but discovered I was gagged with a piece of cloth. Struggling's just going to make it worse, you know, a voice said behind me, the man's voice from the dinner table. Like I said before, you are free to leave whenever you wish, but since you won't give me your loyalty, I'll have to settle with something else. He walked around into my line of vision, holding what looked to be a saw. I'll make this quick, but I have to warn you, I don't like using anesthetic. The body should feel pain. It's natural. How else would it learn to heal? He walked around to the other side of me and turned on a camera that was held up on a tripod facing me. The lights blinked to signify that it was recording. He came back to me and placed the teeth of the saw on my left arm, in the pit on the opposite side of the elbow. Now, snakes don't have arms, so I'll start with that. I struggled against the binds again. Adrenaline coursed through my veins from the fear, with no way to use it. Panic was setting in, and the human body's core instinct is self-preservation. and I was doing the best I could to get away from this. Don't struggle, Jonathan. It just makes it take longer. It'll be over soon. I promise, he said in a calm, steady voice, and with that he pushed the saw downwards. My body screamed with pain, and my vision blackened. I could feel blood seep out of the incision across the arm. He continued to bring the saw downwards, pushing it forwards and backwards, cutting through veins and arteries. I felt him hit bone. He continued to cut. I could feel the vibrations of my humerus being split in two. I lost consciousness for the second time that evening. When I came to, my gag was gone, and my arm, the remaining stump, was wrapped up in a tourniquet and bandaged at the end. Everything still hurt, but much worse than before. Much, much worse. The man was still standing there, behind the camera. He seemed happy to see me awake. Had a good nap. Then, he walked over to where I was laying down and held my remaining hand in his. Everyone deserves a choice. Free will is what defines us, so I'm going to give you a choice. You could get up and leave right now and work for me, or have your other arm removed and your legs stitched together. It's completely up to you. Work for a madman, or die to a madman. Self-preservation is stronger than dignity. I want to work for you, I said, struggling between breaths. Very good. Let's get you out of those binds, shall we? He plucked a key from his pocket and swiftly unlocked them. I tried to sit up and promptly fell back down, my head spinning. A man started to walk away. Now, I'm going to begin your induction. You may feel free to leave or explore the house whenever you feel like. If you're hungry, there's leftovers in the fridge. As I said, we're not trapping you here. He turned and smiled at me. You're going to enjoy this, Jonathan. Toodles. He left the room and went up a few stairs that I hadn't noticed before. I took my time getting up, waiting until the earth stopped spinning under my feet. Walking felt strange without an arm. The weight was gone from there, and I felt lopsided and unbalanced. I took in my surroundings. It was some sort of basement under the house, with different types of surgical equipment scattered around. Besides that, there was recording equipment scattered around and placed at various places. A few were still on, but most were turned off. There was a door to my left, and the staircase directly in front of me. There was a placard on the door with a single word on it: elephant. I opened the door. It was dimly lit inside. The air smelled of musk and human waste. There was a small machine in the corner, lit up and whirring, with various cables hooked up to a large mound in the middle. The door slammed shut behind me. The mound moved. I took a step back out of fear. My focus shifted, and the horrible realization that I was looking at a person dawned on me. The person was extremely large, covered in layers of fat that rolled across their body. The person laboriously shuffled around to face me. The tubes from the machine connected into a mask that covered their mouth. The tubes continuously pumped a soft, gray liquid into the person's mouth. I had only seen something like this once before when looking for a murderer who was hiding in an abandoned mental hospital. A force feeder on either side of the mask. The person had two large metal spikes coming out of each nostril and back out the side of their head. Judging by the scars surrounding them, the spikes were drilled inside the cranium until they eventually came out the other side, through the nose. I shuddered at the thought. The person slowly made their way forwards, shoving themselves against the floor. The person looked up at me, directly into my eyes. I saw the pleading in them, the humanity, asking to be set free. And I saw something else, a flicker of recognition, of understanding. I looked closer, past what I didn't want to see, past everything I didn't want to think about, and I saw a friend. I saw Thompson. He was battered and beaten, and larger than he used to be, but it was still him. I rested on his shoulder and cried, long and hard. This, more than anything, broke me. Thompson didn't deserve this. No one does. I glanced behind me at the saw that cut off my arm. I stood up and grabbed it off the table with my remaining hand. I brought it over to Thompson and held it over his face. His eyes grew misty, but he nodded, a slow and deliberate movement. He knew what it meant. It was going to be hard to cut with only one available hand, so I opted for a large swing and used momentum to get the job done. A clean cut that severed his jugular and removed his life from his body. I dropped the saw on the ground next to Thompson. I made my way up the stairs and out of the front door. I had no shoes on, and the gravel road was tough under my feet, but I walked forwards. I was leaving, and nothing would stop me. The man had said so himself, and so I left. but not forever. I will be back. For Thompson, for Alice, I've got nothing left to lose, and everything to gain. I don't want to be your friend anymore. Those gut-wrenching words were earth-shattering to my 9-year-old ears. I masked my pain with anger, screaming at Lisa with tears clouding my vision. Fine, I didn't like being friends with you anyway, I huffed, stomping off dramatically to go sit by myself on the swing set. Mom could tell that something was wrong the moment I opened the car door. Mallory, is everything okay? It looks like you've been crying, she said after allowing me a moment to strap myself in. I'm fine. Are you sure? You know you can come to me with anything, okay? I nodded, turning to the window to gaze out at the vehicles whizzing past. The remainder of the ride was marred by a tense silence. I bolted to my room the moment the car rolled to a stop. I locked my door and buried my face in my pillow, fat sloppy tears seeping into the fabric. Suddenly, white-hot rage enveloped me. Who did Lisa think she was? Did she think she was better than me? Well, I'd show her. I raced to my plastic picnic table, plopping down on the bright yellow bench and retrieving my crayons and printer paper. I was determined to show Lisa exactly how she'd made me feel. I scribbled furiously at the page, my masterpiece gradually coming to fruition. I put the finishing touches on my demented portrait, drawing a pronounced black X where each of Lisa's eyes should have been. I placed the crayon beside the page, admiring my handiwork. The gruesome scene depicted Lisa's body being crushed by the massive tires of a truck, her head completely separated from her flattened form. I couldn't wait to hand it to her at school. I awoke the next day in a chipper mood. I was ready to make Lisa pay, only I'd never get the chance. Lisa was absent. One day turned into 2, then 2 to 3. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a tad bit worried about her. Where was she? On the 3rd day, we finally received an answer. Mrs. Allen stood before the class, holding back tears. So I know that you've all been wondering where Lisa has been. She took a moment to compose herself as whispers erupted among us. I've received the tragic news that Lisa has passed away. Mrs. Allen burst into tears, unable to hide her devastation any longer. The whole class fell silent. A few of the girls started bawling their eyes out. I just sat there in dumbstruck shock as an empty pit manifested in my stomach. This couldn't be happening. Yes, I was pissed at her, but Lisa didn't deserve to die. We had a sub for the rest of the day. Some of the inconsolable kids were picked up by their parents. I was left to process the sickening reality that the only real friend I'd ever had was gone. Days passed, and rumors flew. Kids began to talk, and what they said shook me to my core. Johnny Herman's mom was watching the evening news when he happened to walk in on the story. Lisa was killed in a hit and run. The truck had hit her at just the right angle to send her head flying from her body. It couldn't be. This had to be some sort of demented coincidence. I couldn't have been the cause of Lisa's death, right? I needed to test it out. The day I'd heard the gossip, I bolted straight to my room. I claimed my seat at the plastic table, and I began to ponder. What should I draw? I thought hard, coming up with idea after idea, just to throw each into my mental waste bin. Suddenly, a light bulb blazed to life in my head. I needed a new best friend, so why not create one? I decided to make my new bestie a little girl. She had blue hair and striking purple eyes. She wore a white shirt that read "I love you" enclosed in a big pink heart. I captioned the picture "New Best Friend," marking it at the top in black crayon. And then I waited, and waited, and waited. Maybe the whole thing really was just a strange coincidence. After too many agonizing minutes of sitting and waiting for something to happen, I conceded to the fact that I didn't have any supernatural drawing abilities. Trudging downstairs to finish my homework, after a relaxing evening of watching movies and eating TV dinners with Mom, she tucked me into bed. Good night, Mallory. I love you. Good night, Mom. I love you too. I was just beginning to drift off to sleep when I heard it. A rustling noise inside my closet. I froze, my heart thudding against my tiny ribcage like a drum. I held my breath and listened intently. To my abject horror, my closet door began to slowly creak open. In the dim moonlight flooding through my window, I could see spindly black fingers wrap around the frame. A cartoonish face gradually emerged, sending fear racing to my heart. Purple soulless eyes peered into mine. A crudely drawn semicircle was entrenched above its chin, forming an ugly twisted smile. Long blue hair cascaded down its back, still and unwavering with each jerky movement. I stifled a scream. Instead, I urgently reached for my bedside lamp. The room was bathed in light. My gaze was drawn to the blocky white shirt fixed to its chest. A massive pink heart was emblazoned on the front. Inside it read, "I love you," a nauseating cocktail of elation and dread swirled in my gut. So it was true. What that meant, I was suddenly jolted back to reality. A figure shuffled closer, leaving the obscurity of my closet. It stood before me, head cocked to the side like a curious dog. It was studying me. It timidly reached out a scraggly hand. I whimpered, retreating under the blankets. The drawing leapt back behind the door. It peeked at me apprehensively, poking its bulbous head from its perceived safe haven. Gradually, I shed the covers, and our eyes connected. Though she was born from crayon and paper, I thought I could make out some sort of emotion behind those dark and even orbs. Fear. I began to realize that she was just as afraid of me as I was of her. I hesitantly scooted to the edge of my bed, trying to make myself as non-imposing as possible. "It's okay, I won't hurt you," I squeaked, attempting to coax her into the open. She incrementally slid out from her hiding place, returning to the center of the room. I gazed at her in awe. Now that I was getting a chance to completely drink in her features, she wasn't so scary. I had created her, after all. "Can you speak?" She pointed to her motionless mouth and dejectedly shook her head. "That's okay, I can do all the talking." "I bet you're a real good listener," I exclaimed, patting the spot on the bed beside me. Her eyes seemed to light up. She excitedly hurried over to me and plopped down. She stared at me expectantly, those same blank features now radiating a renewed sense of life. Jubilation coursed through my veins. Could this really be my new best friend? "You have to have a name." Let me think," I said, mulling it over. "Stacy." "No, Greta, that doesn't really fit." "Oh, I've got it. I'll call you Mona." Mona bounced up and down, clearly over the moon with my selection. My heart was filled with joy upon seeing her so happy. I stayed up talking to her well past my bedtime. Though Mona couldn't respond verbally, she would react animatedly to anything that I told her. Her responses always seemed genuine. It was a nice change to have someone who was actually interested in what I had to say. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have at some point, because I was awoken by Mom's shrill demands for me to get up. "Mallory, out of bed, now. You're late." I groggily rubbed my eyes, heart sinking when I noted that I was alone. "I'm up, just a minute." "Last night, Mona, was it all an elaborate dream?" I couldn't be certain. I rushed to my closet, flinging the door open in my desperate search for answers. I was greeted by nothing but clothes. My heart dropped. I felt as if I was given a puppy just to have it ripped from my hands. The moment I closed my eyes, I dejectedly went through the motions, muddling through my day. How could I make all that up? It felt so real. I returned home from school and immediately shut myself in my room to sulk. I was around 15 minutes into just staring at a blank wall when I came to the realization, the drawing, if that was real, then maybe Mona was too. I darted to the plastic table, frantically shuffling papers, and there it was. Mona's lifeless eyes stared back at me. I shuddered. I couldn't explain it, but something about the picture unsettled me. It looked different somehow, more realistic. I put the page down, opting to try calling out to Mona myself. I sidled up to my closet and hovered my fist before the door. Was I crazy? Of course Mona wasn't real. I didn't actually have powers, right? I had to know. Hesitantly, I knocked 3 times, and in an unsteady, quivering voice, I spoke. "Hey, Mona, are you in there?" I stepped back and waited, and to my utter disbelief, the door began to open. My heart thumped furiously against my chest as our gazes connected. She was real. I grinned from ear to ear as she joined me on the bed. Mona and I hung out for hours. We played games, drew pictures, and she listened intently as I bounced from subject to subject. Things went on like that for months. I would excitedly return home from school, bolt to my room, and spend time with Mona for the remainder of the evening. It was perfect, or so I thought. As more and more time passed, I somehow failed to notice that Mona's features were slowly becoming more defined. Her sloppily drawn t-shirt began transitioning to real fabric. Her skin was tangible. Her smile grew wider. God, I was so naive. It didn't really sink in until Mona gained the ability to speak. A chill rippled through my body when I heard it for the first time. Her voice was soothing yet unnerving at the same time. "So you know what I told Dylan?" She shook her head, ocean blue hair flitting as she did. "I told him you are real, Mona." She pointed a finger at her chest. "Mona." I stared at her, mouth agape. I was paralyzed. "Did you just speak?" She gleefully nodded, her cheeks flushing with color. "Mona, that's awesome. Say something else." She excitedly thrust a finger toward me. "Mallory." "That's right, Mona. I'm so proud of you," I shouted, throwing my arms around her. She felt warmer than I remembered. "Knock, knock, knock." "Mallory." "Who are you talking to in there?" "Unlock this door right now, young lady." Panic struck my chest like a lightning bolt. "Sorry, Mom. Just a second." I turned to Mona, but she had already disappeared. I begrudgingly approached the door and let Mom in. Her visage was contorted in a cocktail of worry and confusion. "Mallory, I thought I asked you not to lock that door. Now, who are you just talking to?" I stared at my feet. "Mona." "Was Mona my friend, Mom? She lives here." Mom's brows furrowed. I watched the confusion melt away as she mulled over my words. "All right, sweetie. You and Mona really need to spend more time outside. You've been in here too much lately. Okay, can you leave now? I want to play with her some more." Mom was visibly taken aback at my request, but she obliged. A pang of guilt stabbed me through my heart like a butcher knife as she left. "I'll let you and Mona get back to it, but I want you in bed by 10. Got it?" "Yeah, all right, I'll do it," I huffed, crossing my arms. Once the door clicked shut, Mona peeked her head out from under my bed. "Mom gone?" "Yeah, Mona, she's gone." She slid out from the bed, rejoining me. "Mona, sleep in bed." "Yeah, you can sleep with me. We just have to make sure that Mom doesn't find out." "No, Mom." "That's right, Mona. No, Mom." "Mona." And I began to develop a real connection. She shared the bed with me every night going forward, whenever I wasn't at school or being forced out of my room by Mom. I was hanging out with Mona. Her and I became intertwined, and her characteristics, both physical and emotional, became more human with each passing day. Things were going great until Mona's hair color changed. "Mallory, time for school." "Mom, I'm up," I yelled, a twinge of annoyance seeping into my words. "Good morning, Mo." I paused. Mona's hair was no longer that deep shade of blue that I'd fancied so much. Now it was brown, just like mine. Mona yawned, stretching her arms high in the air. "Morning, Mallory." Mona, did you change your hair color?" "Yes," she bashfully admitted, averting her gaze. "Why? How?" "Wanted to be pretty like Mallory." "Drew on paper," she said, pointing to the plastic table. "Mona, that's sweet, but you are pretty. I liked your blue hair." "Oh, Mona ugly now?" Tears began to well in her eyes. "Of course you're not ugly. That's not what I meant." Mallory, get up, now." "Mom, I'm up. Give me a second." I turned to Mona. "I need to go to school now, but we'll talk about it when I get home, okay?" She nodded and watched in silence as I prepared to go about my day. "Mona going to miss Mallory," she said as I walked out the door. "I'm going to miss you, too." My eyes kept darting to the clock throughout the school day. Something didn't feel right. Mona had never told me that she'd miss me before, and she changed her hair to the same color as mine. Something felt wrong. I beelined for my room the moment I got home. I had to get to the bottom of whatever was going on. Mona, where are you?" "Mona here," a soft voice responded from beneath the bed. Slowly, she emerged, greeting me with a huge smile. Her hazel eyes glimmered with excitement. "Wait, Hazel, I have hazel eyes." "Mona, what did you do to your eyes?" She proudly held up the picture I had drawn weeks prior. She'd furiously scribbled over the figure's eyes in brown crayon so that the purple was no longer visible. Mona looked like Mallory now. Mallory-like. I paused for a long moment, really taking an opportunity to soak in her appearance. Mona was right. She looked scarily similar to me, almost to the point that you could have mistaken us as twins. "Mona, you need to stop changing the picture, okay? I like you how you are, okay? How's school?" she asked, placing the drawing on my bedside table. "It was good. I'll tell you about it," I said, plopping down next to her as the tension in the atmosphere dispersed. I went to sleep that night feeling closer to Mona than ever. She just wanted to be like me. That wasn't a bad thing, right? I should have seen the writing on the wall. I awoke to find a pair of cold hands wrapped around my throat. A shadowy figure had me pinned down, unforgiving icy fingers choking me with relentless force. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, my heart plummeted into my gut. "Mona," I wheezed, desperately clawing at her hands. "Mona hate being alone. Mona hate Mallory. Mona going kill Mallory." I shuddered. Her changes to the drawing. It all made sense. Mona was planning to replace me. "Please," I sputtered. Something wet dripped onto my forehead. "Mona, sorry." I could feel my life fading. I had to do something, and fast. I grappled for anything I could use as a weapon, and that's when my fingertips grazed the paper lying on my nightstand. I laboriously inched it closer, and closer until, thought it, I held the drawing in front of Mona's face. Her eyes grew wide as dinner plates. Mona just wanted to be real girl, she whimpered. All she could do was watch as I tore the page down the middle. Suddenly, I was free. Mona had vanished, wisped into the dark, never to return. Tears flooded down my cheeks as I violently gasped for air. I stayed there for a long time, sobbing uncontrollably. I had almost died, and lost two of my best friends in the span of less than a month. A sudden sense of ambition crashed over me like a tidal wave. I couldn't take any chances. I needed to be absolutely sure that Mona was gone for good. I scooped up all of my drawings from the plastic table and retrieved the lighter Mom kept in the kitchen. Rushing out the back door, I set the pictures ablaze and watched as the smoke billowed high into the cool night air. "Mallory, what are you doing out here?" Mom placed a hand on my shoulder and spun me around to face her. She gasped upon seeing my face. "Mallory, what happened?" "Your neck. It's all bruised." "Who did this to you?" Tears welled in the corners of her eyes as I choked out a strained excuse. I don't know. I woke up like this." I know that Mom didn't believe me for a second, but it was the best explanation I could offer, without being sent to the loony bin. On the plus side, I got to stay home from school for a couple weeks until my bruises began to fade. Mom told Mrs. Allen that it was pneumonia. No one questioned it. When I did finally return to class, my heart nearly burst with elation. I hurriedly hung my backpack on its hook and claimed my seat, right next to a grinning Lisa. I don't think I'll ever truly understand how my ability works, but one thing is certain. I won't be drawing anything else for a long time. Pup, honey, I groaned. It's really late. I have to get up for work in the morning. Manny grumbled. He was popping bubble wrap in bed again. Sorry, Mel. I'll try and be quieter. Pup. He was still too noisy, but I let it go. He had recently lost his job. Manny used to work in a warehouse, packaging boxes to be delivered. It was going fine, until he was fired. He told me it was because the bubble wrap in the deliveries he sent was all popped. Even though they repeatedly told him not to pop the bubble wrap in his packages, he still couldn't help himself. He had been unemployed for a few days. It had been 5 years since we married, and we still had a strong relationship. We were both on our way to our mid-30s, and considering having children, we were the odd couple. We were Manny and Mel. It's how the locals always saw us, always together. I remember the first time we fell in love. I was the one who fancied him. He was cute, with bright brown hair and brilliant blue eyes. I still love him, and I really miss him. Manny was awkward. He was different. Not the bad kind of different. He was just peculiar. He always saw the world in a different light from everybody else. He wasn't a genius, by any means. He was just unique, and he was kind, kinder than any other man I had ever met. He wasn't lonely either. He could have lived a life of solitude, but he struggled to socialize. I think that made us work well together. I was the social front of our relationship, and he was the deep thinker. He had his quirks, but they never really stopped him until he was fired. Of course, Manny's most notable quirk was his strange obsession with popping bubble wrap. Yet, some people found it odd, but I always thought it was normal. If you knew him, you would understand. And who doesn't like popping bubble wrap? Everyone does, even me. Manny just enjoyed it more than everyone else, and he was never ashamed to admit it. I thought that was really bold of him. I still did find it annoying occasionally, but I could look past it. You'd be surprised how many people judged him for it. The next day, I returned from work. Manny was outside our flat, fumbling around with 5-person-sized rolls of bubble wrap. I was just as surprised as I was pissed off. Where the hell would we keep them? We live in a flat. I stomped up to Manny, who was trying to pick up 2 rolls at once. Well, okay, Mel, hear me out. He stammered. It may look like I splashed 120 quid on bubble wrap, but I got them at a reduced price. No, that's not the issue. You told me that your hobby wouldn't grow out of control. Plus, where the hell will we keep all this? Oh, come on. We can easily squeeze it all in the laundry room. The laundry room, I yelled, my voice squeaking. Okay, how much did you spend? About 12 quid, he said, sounding cooler this time. I could not deny how cheap that was for 100-meter long bubble wrap. Oh, okay. Was there some bargain sale for bubble wrap going on then? Well, you see, the thing is, he seemed to lower his voice as though he knew some government secret. While I was looking for a new job, I found this website that sells bubble wrap at a reduced price. It was called Bob's Bubble Wrap or something. I'll send you the link on WhatsApp. He got out his phone, and a few seconds later my phone dings. While he lumbered the bubble wrap into the flat, I tried using the link. This site can't be reached. Manny, this link does not work. What? He said midway to our laundry room. I repeated myself, this link. It doesn't work. Are you sure? I tried it again, but it still didn't come up with anything. Yeah, unsure. Give me a sec. He dumped the roll in the hallway and came over. May I have a look? I looked at him with a slack jaw. I sarcastically said, well, okay, Mr. Tech Genius. I don't know how you're gonna magically make it work, but go ahead. He took the phone from me. Well, the link worked for me, so I don't see why it shouldn't for you. Of course, the link only works for you. Like any other person, I do not like being told how to use my phone. Manny did this every time he thought I was being technologically incapable. I guess it was another one of his quirks, being shrewd as hell. Here, he said as he passed it back. It worked. My phone showed what looked like an early 2000s webpage. Wait, what did you do? I just used the link, he said as he backed up towards his rolls of bubble wrap. I looked at the site on my phone. It was the strangest site I had ever seen. The title read Bob's Bubble Wrap for Popping. It sounded like it was written by Ned Flanders. I read the description. Have you ever been wondering why the world uses bubble wrapping for delivering and not a popping? Well, my goal in life is to try and make bubble wrap to pop for all bubble wrap enthusiasts. Hearts desiring, no strings attached, and everything on here is as low a pricing you'd ever getting. 10% the usual pricing. Why now? Like, what? What is this description? How is this site selling this stuff to anyone, excluding my husband? This just made me laugh. Anyway, I decided to look at some of his products. He wasn't lying. It only sold bubble wrap from widths of 300 millimeters by 100 meters up to 1,500 millimeters by 100 meters. My husband had gotten 5 rolls of the latter. Obviously, he also sold them in all the colors of the rainbow. Thank God Manny only got plain white. The other colors looked childish. It seemed so pointless, a whole site just for buying bubble wrap. It smelled funny, but what harm could it bring? I read the disclaimer at the bottom, but only remembered it later. I regret that now. I approached Manny. He had just laid the rolls of bubble wrap out on the floor of the laundry room. How did you pay for this? Did you buy it in store or? No, they must have delivered it here. You mean for free? He grunted credulously. I guess so. I did not ask how he paid for the bubble wrap itself. Thank God you weren't scammed, you numpty, I said with a hint of annoyance. I hope it was worth it. Now you have plenty of bubble wrap at least. Yep, this should keep me going for a while, he said, stretching his arms and groaning. He then lay back across the bubble wrap, feeling its bouncy consistency. Can you imagine what sex would be like on this stuff? What? I said, giggling. Sometimes, my husband would say the most random and funniest stuff of things. Are you for real? He just gave a look that screamed, you betcha, I am. I laughed out loud at this. Come on, let's watch some Netflix. I'll leave you to guess whether we had sex on the bubble wrap bed or not. A couple of weeks later, with nothing of note happening, Manny remained unemployed, and I kept our boat afloat. So scratch what I said earlier about him being capable of living by himself, living a life of solitude. He would most definitely sink without me. I was talking with Jane, one of our neighbors. We did this every time we would run into each other outside the flat, more out of politeness than shared interest. As you do, she was talking about one of the neighbor's cats that usually visits her. You know Mel, the one that keeps bringing me presents. she prodded. Oh, you mean, what was its name? Connie, I suggested. That's right, Connie. Unfortunately, I heard she died recently, she said sadly. I was not surprised. Pets die all the time. Yet, I still acted sad. Oh, what a shame. Well, yes, she dawned on the face she puts on before gossiping. They apparently found her a bloody mess, and almost unidentifiable, except for her color. I frowned. So, she was killed by someone, perhaps, but they could not tell. When they got a veterinary to look at her, the veterinary couldn't say how she died. But, rumor has it, she looked like she exploded. I let out a short laugh, and then inquired, what? Jane chuckled as well. I know, exploded. Cats don't spontaneously explode, do they? I don't really believe that. Who is to say how she died? I don't know where that rumor came from. It sure sounds way too steep to me. She then lowers her voice back to her normal volume. Oh, I will miss her. It wasn't long ago she brought me a scrap of bubble wrap. It is probably from your husband's collection. I just nodded at this. How is Manny at the moment, anyway? Oh, good, good. Still looking for work. He hasn't given up yet. The conversation rambled off from there. It was not too long before Manny started changing. I was walking past the bathroom one morning when I heard it. Pop. Manny was in the bathroom. It sounded like he was popping his bubble wrap in there. This was very unusual of him. Plus, the popping noise didn't sound the same. It sounded wetter. Pop. Then he made a pained noise. It was like he was trying to repress the sound. If something was wrong, I knew he wouldn't make a fuss unless he knew it was serious. Honey, I called, are you alright? With a sudden stir, he yelps, I'm fine. Are you sure? I'm good. I just hurt myself, like an idiot. Well, okay. I moved on. Later, I noticed loads of plasters from our medical cabinet had been used. The packaging had been crumpled, as though Manny had desperately scooped them out of the box. He was lying down on the sofa popping more bubble wrap. Have you been using the plasters? Almost all of them have been used up. I knew he had, but I felt he needed to admit to using them. He looked towards me slowly, and robotically said yes. I accidentally cut myself. Multiple times. No, I just didn't apply a few of them properly at first. I looked sternly at him. How did you cut yourself? It's a bit embarrassing, but I think I did it on the bubble wrap. Oh, really? I had felt the bubble wrap, though it didn't seem too sharp. If anything, it was soft and cushioned. Still, I had no real reason not to believe him, so I decided it wasn't worth interrogating him. Then, suddenly, it got a lot worse. The evening news was on, and Manny got up to get something from the kitchen. But he seemed to trip. It was not the sound of him falling to the ground that made me come over. It was the pain he sounded like he was in. He was whining like a hurt deer. Are you alright? I said as I made my way to him. Though I didn't need him to respond, as I saw the droplets of blood on the floor just behind him. Gosh, you're bleeding. I'm alright. He spat feebly. I just cut my heel. Let me have a look. I lifted up his foot before he could respond. There was an inch-long rip on the bottom of his foot. It definitely was not cut. It looked too jagged. I looked him in the face. This isn't a cut. It looks like you grazed your heel somehow. Did you tread on something? He had given me a look that told me he did not want me to know. I knew he didn't want me to worry about him, but I needed to know what was wrong. Okay, what is going on? You look like you're hurting, and you won't tell me why. I gave him a severe look. Please, we're partners. Tell me what's happening. Manny looked back at me, and I could immediately tell he felt what I felt, worry and confusion. I'm sorry, he said. It's just I don't really know. Honestly, just look. He took his shirt off, exposing his chest and arms. I couldn't explain it. They didn't look like cuts or rips. His skin was inflating, not like a balloon, but more like bubbles. They only occupied his left breast and his left arm. They formed in patterns, each a few centimeters from the other in checkered formation. They looked like warts, just without the infected look. His skin stretched with the growths, making them look pale and almost transparent. More than anything, they made his skin look like bubble wrap. The bubbles, under the peeling away plasters, on his arm looked similarly damaged to his heel. As I noticed this, I realized that his skin hadn't been cut or torn, but had been burst. What are you? I stuttered, now hyperventilating. Are you having some kind of reaction? I don't know, he said, anger and fear now very present in his voice. I don't know what is happening. My skin started doing this yesterday, but they just keep coming back. no matter how many times I pop them, and nothing but air comes out of them when I do. My arms are numb. And he suddenly flinched at the sudden movement of one of the bubbles on his arm. They were growing. He raised his other hand to pinch one of the bigger ones. At first, I didn't think he would. It was the size of a marble. But then he just pop blop. I don't know how to describe the sound. It popped, hissed like a deflating balloon, and spat out blood. He then did it again to the next one along, and then again. I just watched him for a few seconds in confusion. As I looked at him, I recognized his expression. It was the same satisfied look he wore while popping his bubble wrap, just this time slightly pained. Then I figured he was not doing it out of necessity, but compulsion. Stop, I yelled, reaching for his right arm. I held it away from the bubbles. Don't, you'll make it worse. He kept trying to pull his arm towards the bubbles while pushing me away. His compulsion was too strong. It was only then I heard his breath. It was starting to struggle, like he was choking on a new potato or something. He bent forward suddenly to try and choke it up, yet was completely unsuccessful. Hold on, breathe, I pleaded while he weighed down on me. Just hold on. I finally came to my senses. I needed to phone an ambulance. Wait here, I'll call 911. It pained me to leave him in that awful state, but I needed to get my phone. It was on the coffee table. I picked it up and called an ambulance. Emergency, which service? The operator had boomed. Everything after that was a blur. I remember sobbing wildly into the phone, while the handler desperately tried to understand what was happening. The paramedics came and delivered Manny. I only became aware of my surroundings again when I started to calm down. I was in the hospital corridor when the doctor came to me. Mrs. Watts. Yes, I spoke up with confidence. Is Manny all right? He looked at me with an expression which meant bad news. He is all right. He is still struggling to breathe, but he paused. We are still trying everything we can to stabilize him. What's wrong with him? I asked. We don't exactly know. We first thought it was anaphylaxis, but now we think it is air embolism. He then started using a lot of medical jargon, so I will try and explain it to the best of my ability. Air embolism, he explained, is when air gets into the bloodstream, blocking it and causing blood vessel blockage. To make it easier to understand, it is like that one scene from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure when Kira, the antagonist from part 4, is attacked by Stray Cat. Stray Cat puts an air bubble into Kira's arm, causing blood vessel blockage. As it said in the anime, if Kira did not remove the air bubble, it would make its way to his heart, killing him in minutes. Why was my husband still alive then? That was what the doctor couldn't figure out. Instead of the air in Manny's blood traveling to his heart, it was collecting in his bloodstream, creating bubbles on his skin. My current theory, he said, is that some unknown force is taking the oxygen out of his blood cells and amassing bubbles in random places in his bloodstream. We still can't figure out why they are in organized patterns or why it is happening at all, but we will do everything we can to find out. If we keep the bubbles forming in his bloodstream small, we can at least keep his blood circulation stable. So, what's causing him to choke? Well, from what we can tell, a big one started forming in his throat. He stared at me gloomily. If we don't do something about it, he could suffocate. But if we pop the bubble, he may bleed to death. Our options are limited. I started crying. When he said this, I didn't want him to die. Can I see him? The doctor nodded, and he showed me to Manny's room. Manny looked even worse than before. The growths were now all over his back and front. The biggest was the size of his fist. They made him look like he had tumors growing under his hospital gown. They were all in the same pattern, the bigger ones pushing the smaller ones out of the way. And even then, I could still see him popping the smaller ones around his belly. I grabbed his hand gently and eased it to my chest. Manny, I cried, what is happening to you? All he could do was croak some short sounds under his oxygen mask. I messed up. It's not your fault. They will fix you. They will. I put his hand on my forehead, wishing for a miracle that would never come. The bubble in his throat, now visible, and the largest, bulged as it grew a few more inches. He gasped as his throat closed up even tighter. Manny, I pleaded, breathe. Please, breathe. Come, closer. I put my ear right beside his mouth. What is it? He coughed once more before finishing. I love you. I will never forget what he did next. Instantaneously, he pulled his hand back and crushed the bubble in his throat. Bang! Blood splashed onto my face, dousing me in the stuff. It gurgled from his mouth, while spluttering out garbled noises as it flooded down his jaw in pints, and the fear on his face. I think he wanted it to be a graceful way out of this world, but his face only told me how utterly scared he was. His eyelids were glued to the tops of his eye sockets, and his mouth opened wide in an inaudible, bloody scream. Everyone else moved around me. The doctors and nurses pushed me out of the way. Someone was pulling me away from him. I don't know who, but I didn't resist. I was deaf to all of the noise in the room. My ears, ringing like a bomb, went off right next to me, and nothing could break the view of my husband. Our eyes had locked onto each other before I could hear the long bleep of a failed heart from the heart monitor. I blacked out. A couple of days later, before I started writing this, I was thinking about what had happened. After Manny died, the doctors gave me their consolation when all I really wanted was answers. The head doctor thought it could be some new virus or disease, like we needed another one. This was only speculation, as all the blood tests they performed on Manny came up with nothing. And yes, he did consider whether this disease is contagious. He thinks it isn't. He said he'd contact me if anyone else showed any symptoms. I haven't heard from him yet. I did tell the doctors what happened to the cat and its similarities to my husband. I don't think they will do much to look into it. As far as I know, the cat was buried. I don't know the owner. It was all just so unfair. Manny was a good person and did nothing wrong to deserve this. Even though I knew it was Matt, I considered the website Manny used. Yet, the link still doesn't work for me. I don't know. Maybe Manny had something which gave him access to the website. Though, I did start thinking about what I could remember about the site, and then I remembered the disclaimer. It took me a while to try and remember what it exactly said, but this is what I could recall. The bubble wrap sold on this website is for popping only. If it is used for delivering, there will be consequences. It was just weird when I saw it at first, but now, could it be the reason all of this is happening? I don't believe in any supernatural mumbo-jumbo, but could it be breaking this rule had led to my husband's death? I do remember Manny having to deliver something to his mother. It was a late Mother's Day gift, I think. Why not use the bubble wrap that was lying around at the time? Then what about the neighbor's cat? I mean, it did not need to use bubble wrap, though. Could it have taken the bubble wrap? Connie did sometimes come in through the window into the laundry room, and Jane did say that it delivered some bubble wrap to her. Did I use the bubble wrap for anything? I don't think I did. Then again, Jane did ask, not too long ago, whether she could use some of it. That doesn't mean I delivered it to her, does it? Though, the verruca on the back of my foot does seem to be getting bigger. Last year, I managed to scrape together a 6-week vacation. It started in late June and went all the way through July. It took a lot of overtime and saving up, but it was gonna be a magical time. I'd bought a new car and was gonna drive state by state to visit friends and family. You know, the aunts and uncles you haven't seen for a decade, the cousins, the childhood friends. I had it all planned out. 5 days before the vacation started, those plans changed. I was coming back from lunch, and a sedan blasted through a red light as I crossed the road. It clipped my left side, snapping my knee and shin bone. Did some pretty nasty damage to my left elbow as well. So all my packed bags were abandoned in the hall, and my new car was left to collect pollen dust in the driveway. It took me an entire afternoon just to call everyone and cancel on them, one by one. Maybe next year, right? So my magical summer was turned into an involuntary staycation. I live in a townhouse, great location, about a 10-minute walk off Main Street. The house is split into 3 parts, each one a separate space. I lived on the top floor, 3 rooms, and a kitchen. Not much, but spacey. There's an identical setup for the space on the ground floor, but that place hasn't been rented out in 2 years. The townhouse is constructed in a way that the various floors are independent of one another and have their own entrances, making it a sort of apartment complex. In a way, there's also a smaller space in the basement. 1 room, 1 kitchen, a bathroom. It was supposed to be used as a temporary space for the landlord's kid, but they found some serious water damage and had to do some work on it. They figured they might as well do some touch up on the plumbing as well. All this work, of course, coincided with my staycation, so not only was I supposed to stay at home for weeks on end, but I also had to do so to the sound of constant machines, jackhammers, concrete saws, cars going in and out of the driveway all day long. After just one day, I could tell exactly what sound came from what machine. They also have this security system. If the door has been closed more than 10 minutes, it locks up, and you have to input a code to get the warning beep to stop. That warning beep went off at least 2 times every hour. I could hear the goddamn beeping in my nightmares. I tried to make it work. I got some ear protectors and tried to stream some shows with subtitles, but I could still feel the shaking. Temperatures were just south of 100 degrees, but I couldn't open the windows, or the construction sound would just get amplified. So I was stuck inside, in complete and absolute misery with nothing but this droning machine torture as company for weeks on end. All the while, I could see my packed bags waiting for me by the door with nowhere to go. I could barely move. With some effort, I could make it to the bathroom, kitchen, and then back to bed. I had a friend of mine come by with some groceries about every 3rd day, but most of the time I was on my own. I would count the minutes until the repairman clocked out. That was my only time of day to get some actual rest, and to watch something with the sound on. It was one of those nights, when I was up re-watching The Sopranos, when I heard yet another car come up the driveway. It was somewhere around 11 p.m. As soon as I heard that grating motor, I got this Pavlovian response to cover my ears. It was just a car, but after living through nothing but construction noises all day, I couldn't bear the thought of the slightest inconvenience. In the after hours, I hobbled over to my window, ready to get into a scream fest. If I heard a single bang of a hammer, I'd be filing a noise complaint. I was on edge, and frankly exhausted. Just standing up, even with a cast, felt like having glass shuffled around inside my broken leg. And the itching. Thought I'd ignore the itching. But when I got to the window, I saw something I wasn't prepared for. One of the repairmen had brought his private pickup. He'd brought his teenage son along. Together they started unloading what looked to be about 20 pounds of planting soil, a box of candles, and about a dozen of arm-length lead pipes. I was dumbfounded. I'd been readying myself to get into a screaming match, but now I was just confused. They went into the basement in waves, carrying everything inside. Then they just stayed down there for some time, at least 2 hours, maybe more. I watched them as they left. They seemed excited. The son was moving back and forth, making wild gestures, and the dad kept smiling and nodding. When they drove away, they turned up the music and kept the windows rolled down. They were having a little party of their own. The next day, no one showed up. It was a Wednesday, and they should have been there, but no one came. All the tools were left outside. They were far from done. The driveway was a mess, and there was plenty of work to be done. Still, I couldn't complain about having a quiet afternoon. For the first time in literal weeks, I spent the day without my ear protectors, rewatching all the Jurassic Park movies. That night, 2 cars pulled into the driveway. The guy with the pickup from the previous night, and an old mud-colored sedan. 4 people in total, none of which I recognized. 2 guys, 2 women, all of them somewhere in their 40s and 50s. I couldn't see what they brought, but it was entire bags and boxes full of stuff. The only thing I could recognize was a handful of royal blue plastic tarps and rope. They were down there for hours. I hobbled over to my front door to listen to what they were doing, but all I could hear was speech and a little cheer every now and then. At one point, someone exclaimed something and the others laughed. It sounded like they were having a good time. I didn't like it, not one bit. They didn't leave until about 3 in the morning. I heard them get into their cars, laughing all the way. I was tired enough to almost fall asleep standing up at that point, but I decided to do something. I wanted to know what was going on. It took a lot of effort just to convince myself to try. I had my phone with me, just in case. A wrong step could send me right back to the emergency room. I got out the front door, hobbled my way to the ground floor, and all the way up the side of the house to the basement entrance. Took me about 15 minutes. The basement had been locked up for the night, but my front door keys could open the lock for both the ground floor and the basement. Perks of having a lazy landlord. The lock clicked open. More stairs. The ceiling light didn't work, but there was a large flashlight right by the entrance. I grabbed it and continued downward. The air was damp with smells, mostly soil, but also dust and plastic. The space wasn't supposed to be very large, but they dug out a massive chunk of ground. It didn't take much effort to see that something wasn't right though. The entire concrete floor had been ripped open. This was probably part of fixing the water damage. They'd covered the raw dirt with blue plastic tarps and then started to fill it with planting soil. Along the edges of the dugout hole were lead pipes. They'd been driven into the ground and had a candle placed atop, like standing torches, 12 of them in total in a perfect circle, and in the middle of that circle was a safe. It was this massive iron box, like some turn-of-the-century level thing, as tall as a small child. It was balancing in the middle of the room, on top of a flat rock, the only space that hadn't been dug out. The safe seemed brand new, like it had been polished and cleaned. It looked like the crew had started to just dig out the floor, but as soon as they encountered this, they'd excavated it completely. There was a ladder leading down into the hole, but I couldn't use it, not in my condition. I remember just standing there with flashlight in hand, not knowing what would pop up in front of me next. It felt surreal. There were little details all over the place. An empty wine bottle in the corner, little holes in the dirt where seeds had been planted, a watering can by the edge of the stairs. There were blankets covering the edge of the hole, making it easier to sit by. I also noticed cigarettes, a radio, and batteries, candles everywhere. In the exposed pipes, on the floor, on boxes lined against the walls, everywhere. I tried to make sense of it. Whatever they were doing down there wasn't part of the job. Still, I had a hard time figuring out what exactly they were up to. Hello. The voice was distant, yet clear. I got the mental image of a flower bursting through concrete, something making its way through a barrier. But there was no question about it. It was coming from the safe. I think it was a woman. I'm sorry, are you new here? I leaned against one of the beams for support and fixed the flashlight on the safe. It was large, but not large enough to fit an adult woman, unless she was crammed in there. I was having a hard time seeing how a voice could come out of it, so I brought out my phone to record it. Hello, hi, can you hear me? I caught it on tape and played it back to myself to make sure I wasn't imagining things. I saved the recording. It's a bit quiet, so I enhanced it. You can if you want, but there's a lot of static. Finally, I decided to speak up. Yeah, I'm here, I said. I hear you. Oh, hi, it said. I'm sure this must all be a bit confusing. Concerning, yes, I said, not sure what to make of it. I pulled out a wicker chair from the corner of the room and sat down. I placed the flashlight on a box, keeping it fixed on the safe. I'm sure it looks quite strange, but you're free to leave at any time. I would certainly hope so. Let's try this again, it said. I'm Angela. No need to tell me your name. I already know it. I've seen a lot of people come down here for the past few days, I said. That's strange. It's mostly harmless fun, Angela said. But yes, I can see how that might be alarming. Yeah, I nodded. Not a lot of people come by construction sites to hang out. Depends. If your favorite band were playing here, you might want to go. Sure, but they're not. They could be. I leaned forward, giving the strange safe another look. I couldn't see any markings. The numbered wheel on the front looked blank. I could show you if you want, Angela said, but I need your consent. Your consent to what, exactly? To show you why people come to stay with me. But I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. Will it hurt? Not at all. All right then. In the blink of an eye, I felt the wind rush towards me. The brightness of the flashlight extended to a wide open sunlit afternoon. I heard a roaring engine, and I could feel the smooth texture of leather against the back of my naked legs. As I opened my eyes, I was somewhere else. It was an open highway, a sunny day, with wind rustling my hair. I was in a car, an open convertible. An old friend of mine was driving. I was in the back seat with my high school sweetheart. I could feel the condensation from an ice-cold bottle in my hand, and the warm wetness of a kiss on my cheek. A whiff of her intoxicating shampoo. This wasn't a memory. This was happening, right now. Mind if I turn up the bass? My friend called out. Don't want to listen to you make out all day. I immediately lost all reservations. I forgot about everything. I spent hours, maybe an entire day, just hanging out with my old friends. I was younger, stronger, happier. Not a care in the world. Money in my pocket, a pep in my step, not a single cloud on an open sky. It wasn't just pleasant, it was beautiful, heavenly. We had drinks and dinner at a great barbecue place. Found a neat motel just as we thought about calling it quits for the night. Every sensation filled me with joy. Warm kisses, cold drinks, a hug from an old friend. It bolstered me, strengthened me. Then it faded away, sand running through the fingers of my mind. And there I was, with a broken leg in a dusty, broken up basement. I'd been gone no more than 30 minutes, even though it felt like an entire day. "Are you okay?" Angela asked. I didn't know how to feel. It was strange being back, but all the sensations I'd experienced still burned in me. I could feel it in my skin, in my mind. It was amazing. "I think I'm good," I said. "I don't know what to say. I suppose you want an explanation." "Yeah, that'd be great." For the next hour or so, Angela told me a story. Back in the day, that safe was just a peculiar thing. It was made back in the times of the Old West, and they'd cast it from a strange metal they'd found in a drain lake. It was supposed to be used as part of a bank vault, but they noticed the money inside would be slightly changed. At first, it had just changed the value printed on the bills, but over time the changes would become more drastic. Some money would be turned into flowers, silver would turn to glass. There were seemingly no rules, except that things would change. So, in one of many grueling cruelties of the Old West, someone decided to stick a child in there. Hence, Angela. Ever since, the safe has been closed. Not even Angela can open it. She grew up in a space where there was no need for nourishment, sleep, or breathing. All she knew was the darkness of that alien box, keeping her in some kind of suspended animation. "I've dreamt about the outside," she said. "I've dreamt about it for so long. Can't we just let you out? It won't open. It can't. And even if it did, I'm pretty sure that it'd kill me. So you're just stuck in there, forever. It's not all bad," she said. "I can go wherever, be whoever I want. The only world I've ever known is the one where you close your eyes and just live, and I can share that experience with you, my friends on the outside." I've never experienced something like that, I admitted. "But this seems incredible. Shouldn't we call someone? Do something?" "I suppose you could," she said. "Maybe the police, or your landlord. Maybe a great scientist. But who's to say they won't put me somewhere bad, or use me for something sinister? How do you know I won't do that?" I said. "I'm not better than anyone else. I'm a pretty good judge of character," said Angela. "And I think the two of us will get along just fine." We chatted for another 30 minutes. Just small talk about everyday life. My job, my relationships, my dreams and hopes. She was very curious and supportive. When I finally had to leave to get some sleep, I couldn't help but long to be back. But before I left, Angela stopped me. "Next time, won't you bring me something?" she said. "It feels good when things change. That's why they bring things here. A poster, maybe some crayons to draw on the walls." "Why?" I asked. The safe, it needs things to change. If they don't, it sort of lulls itself to sleep, bringing me along. So you need an offering." "No, nothing like that. Nothing dramatic. Just something that changes this space, makes it look different, or feel different. I'll think about it." The following day, the construction noises were back with a vengeance. Louder, seemingly random, and non-stop. They'd brought in not only concrete saws and jackhammers, but also a small wood chipper. I was exhausted from the previous night, and spent most of the day just trying to keep my eyes shut. But there was something else as well. I didn't want to get up. I wanted to stay in bed and dream myself back to that impossible day. The wind in my hair, the open road, all worries so far behind we couldn't see them in the rear view mirror. The real world felt cold to me, awkward, like a cocoon wrapped around a struggling insect, yearning to fly free. That night, I skipped dinner and went straight for the basement. I was halfway out the door when I stopped to consider Angela's wish that I'd bring something. I considered skipping it, but there was that tiny part of me that feared that if I did, she might not show me that magical space again. But if I did, I was subjecting myself to her wish. Then again, it was up to me. I could make my own choices. I decided to bring her an empty flower pot. The plant in it had long since died, and I didn't have a use for it anyway. She seemed to like flowers and dirt, so why the hell not? But the basement door was already open. This time, I wasn't alone. There were 2 repairmen down there, along with 3 random strangers. All the candles were lit, casting a warm light across the room, making the shadows dance on the walls. They were all lying on the floor, some inside the pit with the safe, others on the concrete floor. They looked like they were sleeping, twitching, grunting a word every now and then. Little chuckles, sighs of relaxation, like the strangest slumber party I'd ever seen. The wicker chair I'd sat in the previous night was waiting for me. "I'm glad you came back," said Angela. "Thank you for the gift. I figured you'd like it, seeing as you have. Potting soil and all that." I looked around. Standing among these restless strangers felt wrong. They looked too happy, too content. I felt like the only sober guy at a party. "Why do you do this?" I asked. "What's in it for you? I get to live it with you," Angela said, "and I can't do it alone." "But what's the point?" I asked. "It's all fake. What's the point of any experience in the end?" She asked. "It all goes away with us." "Sure, but with that point of view, nothing matters. So let's make the best of it while we can." Wait, the blink of an eye, a sunset beach on a tropical island, palm trees swaying in a warm breeze, children playing in the water, distant strumming on a guitar, and the thumping bass of a party, freshly cut honeydew melon on a platter to my right, and an entire night of possibilities ahead of me. "Angela," I said out loud, we should talk about this." I knew I wasn't really there. That strange sensation in my stomach was still bothering me, telling me that this was all wrong, unnatural, but being there, in that moment, I couldn't discern it from reality. This was Angela's dream for me, and she wanted me to be happy. I was already there. Why shouldn't I indulge? Over the next few days, I started to get to know the other people going down there. Some were part of the construction crew, others were their friends and family. Some went down to spend time with people that had passed. Others were living out dreams of long-lost love or missed opportunities. This one guy was obsessed with a TV show, and Angela helped him live out his dream of being part of the cast. There were about 12 people overall, and I got to know some of them pretty well. The amount of time we spent with Angela changed from day to day. Some experiences could last for days on end, while only spending hours. In the real world, my longest time was about 3 days, while only taking about 2 hours of real time. I was the VIP on a Caribbean cruise, being pinballed between an open bar, smiling faces, and never-ending comfort. And once I stepped out, the others were there for the come down. We shared our experiences, had a few cups of coffee, and went on with our day. Some wouldn't leave though, some would stay there. I lost track of time overall. I missed doctor's appointments, checkups, follow-ups, all of it. I stopped taking calls, and I forgot to give my friend money for groceries. I started having trouble discerning my real needs from the comfort of dreaming. I only ate and slept because my come-downs would get worse if I didn't. That moment where you come back to your body can be devastating if you're hungry, tired, and thirsty. That's why some brought wine. It was easier to come back if you were a bit buzzed. I was involved with this group for about 4 weeks in total. It felt like a lot longer, since every time we went along with Angela would feel like a day in of itself. I went on countless adventures, to the point where I started to dissociate with my body. I'd forget about all my needs and wants. Like, what's the point of changing your shirt if you're only going to be awake in this body for another 6 hours or so? It kind of felt like putting on a 3-piece suit before heading to bed. Now, my leg was still broken. I had people come by to help me downstairs, and the lot of us had fixed up that space pretty well. We'd hung lights along the walls, colored the concrete floor with crayons, and watered the sprouting flowers growing from the pots and soil. I don't quite know what they were supposed to be, but it was called Helianthus Cerulean. Apparently, it was Angela's favorite. We'd made that space our own. Then there was that one night. There were 26 of us in total, all gathered in that basement. I sat in my wicker chair. Others were spread out all across the room. There was this sense of anticipation in the air, like charged static. We could feel tonight was going to be special. And finally, her voice came through. "Oh, isn't this something?" laughed Angela. "So many friends. Thank you for this confidence. I don't deserve you." Some laughed, some just smiled. There was a young couple leaning against one another in the corner, raising a drink towards the safe. Good vibes all around. "Tonight, I want to meet you all there, on the other side. Is that okay with you?" A cheer rose from the crowd. Of course it was okay. We loved Angela. We were dying to see her. "You're all too kind. Sweet dreams, my loves." As I exhaled and closed my eyes, something unfamiliar blanketed my mind. And when I opened my eyes, I was somewhere I'd never been before. I was looking down at my naked feet, buried into black sand. My legs were glazed with the light from a red sun setting over a white horizon. A dark, endless ocean spread out in front of me. The others were there as well. Some looked younger or healthier, but we were all there. Our best selves, relieved of worry and pain. It's different, someone said. We're really here. We're all really here. Some cheered. A couple of girls were dancing by the water. The young couple was making out, rolling around in the sand. I just stood there, taking in the magnificent view. Closing my eyes, my real life felt like the dream. This was the actual me, dreaming that I was a miserable office drone with a broken leg. A hand brushed against my shoulder. "I'm glad you're here," Angela whispered. I looked up at her. Angela was 7 feet tall. It's hard to describe her. She was sort of devoid of color. Not white, not black, just uncolored. No hair, no scars. Neither man nor woman. She looked like a quasi-person who hadn't yet decided on what to be. She had no facial expression. Her eyes had no color. And the strangest detail was her hands. She had no fingernails. I could imagine her looking down on me with benevolence, but at that moment, there was nothing. No matter what I imagined, I could tell there was nothing there. She gave me a pat on the back and turned to the others. "Tonight, you don't have to leave," she said. "You can stay as long as you want. You can go wherever you want. You can go together, alone, or as a group. There are no restrictions. Your generous gifts and your confidence in me have realized my full potential." She dove into the water. We followed her. Others crowded ahead of me, eager to follow her into the deep. I lagged behind. "Let's go for a swim together," she said, "to distant shores and untold lands beyond." My leg hurt. There was this uncomfortable nerve pinch shooting up the side of my body. I looked down. I could feel the water pulling around my feet. I was perfectly fine, but I could still feel the pain, the real pain. Looking back up, some people were gone. I tried to find the young couple, the girls who'd been playing by the water. Counting heads, I only saw 19 of us. Had some of them gone ahead? As I scanned the surface, I saw a head dip under the water. They didn't come back up. One by one, people started to doubt. Some looked at one another, unsure of what to do. Angela, who was the furthest out, urged us to hurry. "Come then," she laughed. "It's not that far." I saw a man ahead of me have a change of heart. He turned to head back to shore. He met my gaze for a second, and in the blink of an eye, he was pulled under. Panic. We fled back to shore. I saw something moving in the waves. Some who dipped down came back up, screaming for help. Others just screeched like wounded animals. A cacophony of horrible realizations came at me all at once. "Let go of me. Let go." One screamed, "It's got me. It's got me. Please. Please. No." As soon as something cold touched my toe, I flinched. And for a moment, the spell was broken. I was back in the real world, standing at the edge of the concrete hole. Everyone else had jumped in. Some were having seizures in the dirt. Others had stopped breathing. I saw a young man with a broken neck. I had been putting weight on my wounded leg, which had distracted me from jumping in myself. I'd been compelled, but that tiny bit of pain had kept me grounded. The safe was slightly ajar, and something was emerging from within. Then I was back on that beach. White algae were spreading across the black sand like sickly veins. I saw one man being dragged into the deep, no matter how hard he dug his hands into the sand. There were only a few of us left. "Just a little further," said Angela. "You're almost there." Her voice boomed across the horizon. I tried to run, but I couldn't. My leg hurt too much. But I clung to that pain. I let it radiate through me. I listened to it, and I let it pull me back to what was actually happening. Reality. That spiking ache enveloped me, and I opened my tired eyes. Something let go of my arm. As I pulled my way back from the edge of the hole, there were only a handful of bodies left. A colorless arm emerged from the safe, grabbing a middle-aged man by the leg. It started pulling him back. "It's not too late," said Angela, her voice much clearer now. "You can still come with us." "What the hell are you doing to these people?" I asked. "What is this?" "They're coming with me," she said. "We're going away. You're killing them. You're killing us. With your consent." The body of the middle-aged man snapped and twitched as it was forced into the safe. It reminded me of a snake with an unhinged jaw, devouring its prey whole. Something grabbed my healthy leg and pulled me forward. I tumbled into the pit right next to the safe. From there, in that angle, it looked enormous. My heart pounded, trying to leap out of my chest. This wasn't a well-meaning dream fairy. This was a goddamn predator. I don't want this. You said you did. You don't have my consent. I say no. No, you don't want this. No, I want to go. Right now. There was a moment of consideration. The safe was left slightly ajar. Angela took a deep breath. I'll make you want this. The next part is hard to talk about. In the blink of an eye, I was in a scorching desert. I was chased by rabid beasts, longing to rip me apart. They seemed to get closer and closer the faster I ran, and the sand dunes went higher and higher. Sweat stung my eyes, and my lungs were aching from exhaustion. In a way, I knew I could give up. I could give in. I could take Angela's hand and walk peacefully into the unknown. But the beasts caught up to me, and mouthful by bloody mouthful, they started tearing me apart, leaving my body broken and exposed in the sand. My throat struggling to breathe. I could feel myself slipping in and out of consciousness. Tell me when you're ready to go, Angela whispered, brushing my hair. Just take my hand. I wanted to, but I could still feel my broken leg. This wasn't real. Over what felt like weeks, maybe months, I was tortured. I was shot, drowned, eaten, burned, dismembered, all of it. The worst was when she put me someplace where I knew it'd happen eventually, but not immediately, or when it could happen at any time, but I didn't know when. I had everything I loved destroyed in front of me. Every dream turned nightmare. I was back in that car, with the wind rushing through my hair, and my high school sweetheart punctured my eyes with her teeth. I was eaten alive by family and friends. I was buried alive, hearing people dance on my grave through rotting years. All my screams went unheard, and all my tears meant nothing. This would never end. This would never stop. A never-ending parade of misery, and no matter how much I screamed, cried, or begged, it didn't matter. I had to submit. I had to give her my consent. I had to, or this would keep going. But I held on to my pain, the real pain. I knew that somewhere out there was the actual world, with real horrors and real experiences, where dreams were just dreams. At some point, I woke up in an ambulance, an oxygen mask chafing against my nose. I could smell blood. I couldn't move my arms, and there was a strange tingle in my fingertips, a deafening siren pounding my ears. He's coming to. Someone called out, "Sir, sir." I remember looking into the eyes of a young man standing next to me. He was trying to check my pulse. My leg, I said. It hurts. It really, really hurts. And it did. It really did hurt, for real. One of the other contractors had been wondering what was going on. People had stopped answering his calls. He'd come around to check on the place, only to find me, alone, unconscious in the basement. He'd called an ambulance. Apparently, he didn't stay long enough to listen to Angela, or maybe she was busy talking to me. They pulled me out and took me to the hospital. I fell in and out of consciousness all the way through. Meanwhile, repairs resumed. The first thing they did was fill in the floor. No one told me what happened to the safe. As it turns out, I was in Angela's world for 3 actual days. There were some inquiries about people going missing, but apparently it isn't as uncommon as one would think. My episode was attributed to an overdose on painkillers. The others, well, there wasn't one single explanation. I tried talking to people about it, but it was hard to make them listen. I'm writing this to remind myself that what I experienced was real. I can't talk to anyone about it, since anyone involved is, well, gone. I've since moved to an apartment instead, and my leg is all better. And the further I get from that day, that summer, the more it feels like an impossibility. But I know it happened. I know it did. I think what saved me in the end was getting away from that place. But still, in my heart of hearts, I have to admit, I want to go back. Maybe if I'd followed her, everything would have been okay. And maybe it wouldn't be. It was my best friend Luke's idea to form our own detective agency inspired by the shows we loved watching together. We lived on Brook Street in a small town in Oregon, so we called ourselves the Brook Street Sleuths. We advertised our services on the community board in Elmer's Market, which usually cost 25 cents a week, but Mr. Elmer kindly allowed it for free. They worked on various cases in the space of a month or so over one summer. Who's been taking the blackberries from Ms. Jacobs' brambles? Solved almost everyone who passed by, and lots of chipmunks. What made the small hole in the lorry's front yard? Solved a chipmunk. Yeah, we had an abundance of chipmunks in town, but not all of the mysteries involved the little critters. They were clearly not mysteries to the adults who hired us, but the best thing about living in that kind of community was the willingness of our neighbors to contribute to our idea of fun. Luke and I were rewarded with many sodas and candy bars for our sleuthing skills. Despite our success rate, the Brook Street Sleuths was a short-lived agency. Our last ever case began with a very real mystery. Where is Mr. Page's dog? Frank Page was a retired widower and happened to be my next-door neighbor. His dog Milo, a Yorkie, was what Frank referred to as a pain in the proverbial. Milo was an expert escape artist. He was always getting out of the yard and causing mischief in town, but would usually come back home with his tail wagging after an hour or two. One evening we could hear Frank calling for Milo from the doorstep. He'd escaped as per, but it had been several hours, and he still hadn't returned. My dad offered to drive around the neighborhood to look for him, but had no luck. The next morning I helped Frank make a missing poster. We stuck a photograph of Milo on a sheet of paper using glue sticks, and I neatly wrote the details underneath in black marker as dictated by Frank. Then we went to Elmer's Market to use the photocopier and made 10 copies. It should have cost $1, but Mr. Elmer said there was no charge and wished us luck in finding him. Frank bought me a cola as a thank you. You're a good kid, Ricky, he said, patting my back. I could hear he was upset. We'll find him, Mr. Page, I said. The Brook Street Sleuths are on the case. He chuckled. He's a little ass, pardon my French, but I'd be lost without him. I'll go knock for Luke just as soon as we've put up these posters. We left one on the board in Elmer's, then stuck the remaining posters on telegraph poles and the 2 bus shelters in town. I asked Frank if I could keep hold of the original photograph of Milo. That way I could show it to the local residents during our investigation. Before I knocked for Luke, I went back home to tell my parents. Don't wander too far, Ricky, said Mom, and stay out of the woods. I don't like the thought of you boys in there alone. There was a woodland area that lined the back of town. I absolutely planned on looking in there. I told Mom I wouldn't though, of course. I grabbed my bike and rode to Luke's to fill him in on the details. Then we rode around town and knocked on doors, asking if they'd seen Milo. It was mostly unsuccessful, but one lady had some potentially useful information. Now that I think about it, she said on her doorstep, I did see a little dog sniffing around the brambles on Maple Road yesterday. Yes, I'm almost certain that's the dog I saw. Thank you, ma'am, said Luke. We discussed it as we retrieved our bikes from the end of the driveway. There are 2 houses on Maple Road with brambles in the yard, he said. Miss Jacobs, I said, and the Deans. Why did it have to be the Deans? The Dean family were not known for their warm community spirit, especially the oldest son, Tommy. He was a senior and notorious troublemaker who had caused Luke and I a lot of grief. The family also had a much bigger, meaner dog that would probably treat Milo as a snack. We'll go to Ms. Jacobs' house first, said Luke. If we're lucky, we won't have to go to the Deans at all. It was a short ride to Maple Road. We left our bikes on the sidewalk and knocked on Ms. Jacobs' door. Well, she said warmly, if it isn't the Brook Street Sleuths. Hello, Ms. Jacobs, we said in unison. What can I do for you boys? We're looking for my neighbor Mr. Page's dog, I said, showing her the photo. He went missing yesterday afternoon. Oh no, she said. I'm familiar. I sometimes see him in the yard by the brambles, but I haven't seen him for a few days. Thank you anyway, Miss Jacobs, said Luke. Of course, she said. I'll keep my eye out. Oh, and help yourselves to blackberries. As we walked down Ms. Jacobs' pathway, we looked at each other with concern. Knowing we now had to visit the Deans, we took the opportunity to eat a few of the ripened berries before braving it, then wheeled our bikes to their house. The yard wasn't as kempt as the others in the neighborhood. It was overgrown, and there were scraps of metal from various vehicles dotted around like a junkyard. We slowly walked up the path. As soon as we knocked on the door, there came loud barking from inside that made us jump, followed by shouting. The door flew open, and Mr. Dean was standing there holding back their monster of a dog by the collar, which was barking at us like crazy. Shut the hell up, he yelled down at it. It quieted down but growled under its breath. What do you want? Hello, sir, I stuttered. We're asking around to see if anyone has seen my neighbor's dog. I took out the photo. He went missing yesterday, and what makes you think I had anything to do with it? He snapped. It's not like that, sir, said Luke. We're just asking if you've seen him, that's all. He sometimes wanders around the neighborhood. Who do you think you are? He laughed. Columbo or something. Luke and I turned to each other like it had been a bad idea. We're sorry to have bothered you, sir, I said, turning to leave. Believe me, he said, if that rat had been anywhere near here, Kane would have sorted it out. The dog started barking again, and we hurried back down the path. I don't want to see you boys on my property again, he yelled after us. I won't hold him back next time. He laughed loudly as we quickly rode away, my heart beating hard. We stopped around the corner to catch our breath. Then we started to laugh uncomfortably. God, I hate that family, said Luke. We heard the roar of an engine, and a rust bucket of a car came hurtling around the corner, its tires screeching on the road. It was Tommy Dean behind the wheel. When he noticed Luke and I, he gave us the finger and sped away out of sight. So suspicious, I said, but maybe too obvious. Luke shrugged. They're mean, but I think we need to investigate more first. When it felt like we'd exhausted all avenues in town, I suggested we look in the woods. Luke was apprehensive, as, like me, he was forbidden from the woods without an adult, but it seemed logical that a dog would be drawn to the woods, especially with all the chipmunks to chase. If we do find Milo there, I said, we'll just pretend we found him someplace that won't get us in trouble. We looked around for an hour or so, shouting Milo's name from time to time. It got to the point where we figured if Milo was somewhere he could hear us, he would have made himself known by now. Before we left, we both confessed to needing the bathroom badly, so we went in opposite directions to find a secluded spot to pee. Ricky, I heard Luke scream after a few minutes. I quickly finished and retrieved my bike. Where are you? I yelled, my nerves on edge. Over here. I saw him standing in a small clearing and rushed over. What is it? I asked, out of breath. He didn't need to answer. Luke had found what looked like the site of a sacrificial ritual. There were strange symbols drawn onto several tree trunks and what appeared to be blood. In the center was a slab of stone with a chalk drawing of 3 triangles, all pointing the same way, but overlapping each other. In the center of that was a severed animal paw. It had the same auburn-colored fur as Milo's. Oh my God, I said quietly. I really want to leave now, said Luke in almost a whisper. I nodded. Yeah, come on. As I went to pick up my bike, I saw a small satchel sitting by a log. I walked over to it, Luke spotting it too. Leave it, Ricky, he said. It's evidence, I said, about to pick it up, but then I remembered not to contaminate it. I used a stick to lift the flap open and peeked inside. There was a pack of cigarettes and some school textbooks, senior biology and math. Student, I said. I found a large leaf and used it to cover my fingertips, opening the first page of the biology book. Written in pencil in the top right corner, Tommy Dean. A shiver went through me as I told Luke. We got on our bikes and rode like the wind, heading straight to the sheriff's office. We burst in and both started yelling. Whoa, fellas, said Deputy Campbell from behind his desk. Calm yourselves. Now, what seems to be the problem? We explained everything. Luke and I were escorted back to the woods to show the deputy what we had found. Sweet Mother of Jesus, he said, calling it in. There was a search conducted at the dean's house. Inside Tommy's bedroom, they not only found an ancient book of the occult containing the very symbols found at the scene, but also Milo's collar. Apparently, he protested his innocence as they took him in for questioning. I heard all of this through the walls as my parents talked about it that night, having been banished to my room. Poor Mr. Page was devastated. The disturbing nature of it rocked our sleepy community, but Luke and I were commended for our help in the investigation. We both received honorary badges from the sheriff's department, making us feel like real investigators. After a couple of days, Ms. Jacobs required our services again. My mom was reluctant for me to carry on playing detective, as she called it, but my dad talked her around. Luke and I went to visit Ms. Jacobs late afternoon and were greeted by a wonderful smell. Take a seat, boys, she said. I baked you a blackberry pie. Call it a thank you for your services to the community. Thanks, Ms. Jacobs, we both said together, excitedly sitting at the dining table where a warm pie sat in the center. She cut 2 slices and plated them up, handing us one each. Bon appetit, she smiled, taking a seat as we started tucking into the delicious pie. Well done on your investigation. That must have been quite a shock discovering such a gruesome scene. Luke nodded. It was scary, wasn't it, Ricky? Yeah, I agreed, but we handled it like professionals. She chuckled. I'm sure you did. I always knew that Tommy Dean was a rotten apple. I can't help but wonder what it was all for though. Why sacrifice that little dog? We looked at each other and shrugged with mouthfuls of pie. And those symbols, what did they mean? My dad said it was devil worship, said Luke. I'm sure he's right, she said. To think I'd only seen that poor dog a few hours before Tommy took him. I can't help but think I could have done something to help. You couldn't have known, Miss Jacobs, I said. It's not your fault. She patted my hand. Thank goodness you heroes found those school books of his at the scene. Imagine what else he could have done if it weren't for you. I dread to think. Luke and I looked at each other and smiled with pride. Excuse me a moment, she said. I'll be right back. We're heroes. I chuckled when she'd left the room. We found the villain and saved the day. Luke giggled. As we kept tucking and I couldn't help but feel like something wasn't quite right. Then it hit me. Wait, didn't Miss Jacobs say she hadn't seen Milo for days when we were investigating? He shrugged. Yeah, so, but she just said she saw him a few hours before Tommy took him. His brow furrowed. Oh yeah, she is an old lady though, Ricky. My grandma is very forgetful. I contemplated it, but it still didn't feel right. My eyes widened. The sheriff's department didn't release the evidence, I said quietly. How does she know about the books? Luke's eyes widened to match mine as Miss Jacobs came back into the room. Will you look at that? She said. You've almost finished your pie. Let me cut you another slice. No, I said, clearing my throat. It was delicious, but very filling. Very well, she smiled. Let me take this dish away then. When she lifted the pie dish, Luke and I both stared in horror. Scratched into the wooden table were 3 triangles overlapping each other. Oh yes, she said. There was a mystery for you to solve. A mystery ingredient. I wonder if you've got the detective skills to work it out. Luke looked at me like he was about to cry, and I felt exactly the same. He coughed a little and put his fingers to his mouth, pulling something out. What is it, Luke? She asked. He covered his mouth like he was about to puke. Here, clue number 1, she said. And you, Ricky? I shook my head. We'd like to leave now, Miss Jacobs. Nonsense, she said. She took my plate away and put the pie dish in front of me. Go on, have a look. I looked at Luke, who was clearly terrified. My hands were shaking as I picked up the fork and pulled pieces of pastry away. As I searched through the thick, dark purple filling, my fork made a clink sound. I picked it out with my fingers and could instantly feel what it was, a long canine tooth. I threw it across the table and pushed myself back, grabbing Luke's arm. As we made a run for the door, it slammed shut, and the light that had been coming through the windows dimmed. The symbol on the table began to glow, as if it was drawn in embers. Luke and I had our arms around each other as we sniveled, not being able to comprehend what was happening. Ms. Jacobs smiled from across the room, her hair flowing, as if caught in a breeze. What are your findings? She asked. The Brook Street sleuths must be able to figure it out. You killed Milo, I shouted, and the thought of it made me sick. Bravo, she clapped. Make the sacrifice, feed the innocent. But why? Screamed Luke. I am 732 years old. She cackled. That takes a bit of black magic to maintain. She grabbed Luke and I tried to pull him away from her, but with a flick of her hand I was forced against the wall. She threw him down onto the symbol, and he screamed out as smoke began to rise around him. It burns, he screamed in pain. Leave him alone, I cried. She turned to me. The features that made her Ms. Jacobs faded, revealing something ancient and decayed. Loose skin hung from visible bones, empty eye sockets, wispy strands of hair, teeth surrounded by split leathery gums. You next, Ricky, she yelled, deep and demonic. Her mouth opened wide, and she took Luke's whole head inside. His arms and legs began to kick about as I could hear his muffled groans coming from inside her. There were snapping sounds as parts of her dislocated like a snake to swallow him whole. Before long his shoulders could no longer be seen. She made greedy, guttural noises as she forced his body down her throat. I was paralyzed against the wall, forced to watch as my best friend was eaten alive. I could feel my mind snapping like her ancient bones. Luke's legs were still kicking as she reached his knees, and her long bony fingers gripped around his ankles to push the last bit of him inside. There came a loud bang, something that startled her as well as me. The door to the dining room flew open, and 3 officers burst into the room led by Deputy Campbell. "Sweet Mother of Jesus," he yelled, taking aim at what was once Ms. Jacobs. She retched and Luke's whole body slipped out of her, collapsing on the table in a cocoon of translucent goo. I fell from the wall and hit the floor as the officers opened fire on her, forcing her back with a multi-layered scream. The window shattered, and natural light poured in, making her scream even louder as if burnt by the rays. I ran to Luke and pulled him from the table, relieved when he was still breathing. The glowing symbol was fading, and with a final shriek the former Ms. Jacobs became a cloud of smoke that was seemingly sucked into the symbol. Then everything went deathly silent for a few seconds. As it happened, Tommy Dean had managed to convince the sheriff to investigate Ms. Jacobs. He insisted that he had seen her on his property and that his satchel couldn't be found afterwards. Thank God he did, because Luke and I would not be here today if it wasn't for him. We carry the mental scars, but we live. Suffice to say the Brook Street sleuths were no more after that day. When the voices came on the radio, I was playing with my grandfather on the front lawn. He was sitting in his rocking chair, and I was out on the lawn when I heard it. A long whistle on the radio. Then, "Billy, come here. Billy, come here now." Mom began screaming. My dad was running towards me. Grandpa reached me first, hands clasped over my ears, so hard it left a ringing noise. He was a serious, stern old, and I was always a bit afraid of him. Now, he yelled at me over and over, "Don't listen to him, Billy. Don't listen." His voice came out in a suffocated whisper. "Please, God, don't let him listen. I love him." The old man's lined face was scrunched over. He was crying. I began to cry too. I could hear my mom and dad screaming in the distance. Long, horrible wails. I thought they were going insane. "I love you, Billy. Don't you leave us. I love you." We stayed for a bit, grasping each other. When he let go, it was quiet outside. On the porch, Mom was standing over the wrecked parts of the radio, a baseball bat in her hands. That was the last radio in our house. After that day, that old man and I were never close. He never said anything like that, before or after. I wonder if he got embarrassed. That day though, it scared the hell out of him, and he didn't care. In my old town, there's a whistle, and it puts the fear of God in old men. It comes sometimes, and it comes for us. No matter how painfully familiar it became, not one of us understood it. Who is the one whistling? What do they want? Why? Asking such questions was useful as screaming into a well. All you'd get back was echoes. Among the kids, the fear eventually became secondhand. Our parents had seen the consequences of lending an ear to the whistle, though they never told us. Just don't think about it. Other than all that, everything in my hometown was pretty much free reign for us. They were of course told not to play in dangerous areas, and, of course, that just spurred us on. One such place was the old scrapyard, the type of place where you can call active or derelict in equal measure. The favorite spot was a vast heap of warped metal frames at the very edge of the lot, disappearing into the woods, fit for summiting any dry day of the week. They might have been defunct pylons or something, but the strange lack of welds or rust suggested something more obscure. One Sunday, me and my buddy Alex were down in the scrapyard at the stroke of noon, ready as ever to clamber up the perilous heights of Metal Mountain. At first, we called it Iron Mountain, but the name didn't quite fit. The old framework was made of something we couldn't quite put our finger on. We were boys, yeah, but we weren't entirely careless, at least, I wasn't. I made sure to bring carabiner belts for each of us to wear, though I think it was just too tedious to clip, unclip, clip our way up the whole time. Alex, my more nimble counterpart, clambered up a ridge on the heap like a bona fide chimp. All I could do was suggest using the safety clips, not enforce it. "Race you to the peak," he yelled without even looking back at me. It was irresponsible, but damn if his energy wasn't contagious. I followed suit, choosing to clip on only when needed. I was so focused on my footing I didn't notice Alex was gone until taking a breather and looking up. There was nothing but motionless metal wreckage around. "Alex." The only reply was my own echo. I went to shout again when I heard him call out from somewhere. About 20 feet above, Alex crawled out of a gap in the metalwork. He beckoned me to follow. I jumped down with a hollow thud into what looked like an old cargo container. Whoa, has this been here the whole time? Flakes of rust hung lazily from its corrugated walls, framing a gloomy image of Alex beside a dusty table, an appealing green fold-up chair. Well, it didn't just appear overnight, did it? Alex scoffed. What do you think? New base of operations. He turned to the scant tabletop. Its only residents were an old-fashioned radio and some kind of microphone or transceiver. I dunno, man, bit depressing in here, but with some decoration. I trailed off as Alex fiddled with the radio dials. A dim blue display flickered to life, and the radio hissed out static. Dude, Alex yelped while adjusting through frequencies. My dad used to have one of these. If we get walkie-talkies, we can. A sudden hush replaced the static. Then a low, almost inaudible buzz, underlining another sound emerging from the radio waves. Then we heard it. Ears, cover your ears, I screamed, slapping my hands over my drums with such force it sent a painful compression down my ear tubes. I looked back over to Alex. My stomach felt as if it plummeted 10 stories. His arms swayed limply by his sides, eyes locked on the radio. I'm not sure exactly what happened at that moment. The next thing I remember was kicking the radio onto the floor, hands still clamped around my head, then stomping it into scattered pieces. That brief span couldn't have been more than 10 seconds. I grasped Alex by the shoulders and spun him around. His limbs felt stiff, but his eyes are what stick with me to this day. They were murky, churning mist in their depths. The eyes of an old dog. The shine was gone, too, like every molecule of moisture vanished, leaving his eyes matte and dull. I shook him. When that didn't work, I slapped him. Nothing. Alex just stared vacantly at a distant point. Adults need to get adults. I croaked through the hard lump in my throat. Without a word, I pulled myself up and out from the belly of the metal mountain and flew down the beams and bars with reckless abandon. I had to walk around the scrapyard for a few minutes until a single bar of service popped up. I phoned my dad without hesitation. Dad, I'm at the, scrapyard. Alex, he heard it. Wait right where you are. I'm coming. There was nothing else that needed to be said. My dad arrived with 3 other men in a pickup. After a brief explanation and a pointing finger, they set off up the grimy heap for Alex. When they came back, Alex was slung over the largest man's shoulder. They set him in the middle back seat for the ride back, stuffing me in the back. It was hard to hear their conversations. Still, I swear I heard someone say, would have been better off leaving him there. The rest of sat blurred together. My mind was elsewhere. Afternoon bled into evening, bled into night, with oily storm clouds rolling in from the west. I stared out my window through the pattering droplets that died on the glass in small, hollow taps. Amid the clear runnels sat a solitary hill on the edge of town, shunned by the trees around it. I understood its predicament then, on Alex's behalf. The whistle, whatever Alex heard in it, whatever it had done to him, left him alone. Daylight drained over the horizon, yet in the fading dusk, a small figure slowly marched its way up the hill. Dim shades of orange and yellow shone from Alex's blonde hair. My eyes widened. What was he doing? He crested the hill under encroaching shadows and stopped at its peak. I could barely make out his silhouette, eclipsing the low sun. His head pulled back and, though it was hard to tell, I think his mouth was moving. The only way I could describe it was that he was speaking into the sky, into the murky clouds that would swallow his words for themselves. Hey, hun. My mom's sudden coo jolted me back to reality. Bedtime. She didn't comment on my obvious surprise, probably thought it best to ignore the present and let me calm down. It's going to be okay, Billy. None of it was your fault. What about Alex? She hesitated. Hey, he's very sick now. I don't know how much longer he has, but he'll find peace. He won't be in pain. I'm just glad it wasn't. She trailed off in a sniffle and stroked my hair. Just try and get some rest, baby. Okay, Mom, I love you. You too, more than the world and the stars and everything between. I don't know when I drifted into sleep, only that it was long after. The next thing I remember is being ripped out of a hazy dream or nightmare by my dad shaking, his hands pulled away after placing ear defenders on my head. He passed me a torn notebook page, scrawling capitals reading, "Stay here. Do not take the headphones off till I'm back." I nodded and pulled my covers up tight, watching the hallway light shrink to a sliver through the door as Dad left. The shock of it all made everything come rushing back. Alex and the hill. I sprang off the mattress and over to the window, parting the curtains just a crack to peek outside. Other than swinging flashlight beams, it was near pitch black outside. Still, I knew where the hill was. Such a familiar sight, it had become something close to muscle memory. Squinting in its direction, I frowned. A messy array of dots punctured the night, blinking in strange neon greens and blues. An empty sky told me the cloud cover hadn't yet passed. Whatever towered out there in the darkness was below the clouds. Close. Real. I retreated into the sheets. Maybe it was just some sort of faraway radio tower I'd never seen before that just so happened to line up with the hill. An ambient breeze blew in the headphones over my ears, like hearing waves in a seashell. The idea of the whistle worming its way through the white noise terrified me, and I curled up under the covers. Sometime later, my bedroom door opened. I didn't see or hear it, but felt it. A light tapping on my shoulder beckoned me to emerge, and my dad gently removed my ear defenders. "What's happening, Dad?" "They're the lights. Where's Alex?" He didn't answer, only hugging me and whispering that we'd talk in the morning, promptly gliding out of my room and leaving me alone. Sleep never came. How could it? I had so many questions, so much fear, so much guilt. It seemed so damn obvious. An old radio, just like the one on the day Grandpa saved me. The same events played out, only I couldn't save Alex like Grandpa had me. I thought of asking him about it all, but he was still the same old man with little to say. Sure, finding answers was enticing, but it wouldn't fix my mistakes. It wouldn't change the way things had become. When day broke, I parted my curtains reluctantly. The hill was empty. The only difference I could tell was that the grass looked all cut up, earth hewn from its place, lacerated, torn up. I refused to stare any longer and went downstairs. I stood in the kitchen, hesitantly looking through the window at Grandpa sitting on the porch. Would he comfort me or shoo me away? In the end, I turned my back to the sun rays and headed upstairs. With Grandpa on my mind, a light bulb flickered on. I remember when he moved in a few years ago, he'd lugged a bunch of old, dusty boxes up the stairs. He definitely didn't put them anywhere on the first floor, so he must have stuffed them up in the attic. Mom was reading downstairs, while Dad occupied himself with gardening. Can't blame either of them for distracting themselves. The attic hatch cord creaked, and I feared it might snap, but the latch released, and the bolt-on ladder's segments slid apart, hitting the floor with a soft thump. I climbed the cold rungs and had to stifle a cough after inhaling the stale, dust-choked air. I spent some time searching in forgotten corners and behind low-roofed joists until a stack of beaten cardboard boxes caught my eye. There wasn't any writing on them, no names or dates. With their split edges and sagging corners, I got the impression they were what I was looking for. The boxes held bundled stacks of papers, some faded photo albums, and the treasure of my hunt, a leather-bound diary. The spine cracked as I flicked through its pages. Most of the contents were mundane, everyday life, until I stopped at a series of late May entries from '72. I won't bother writing it in my own words. The raw details are more than enough. This is what it said. May 23rd, 1972. I need to get it out because if I don't, I'm scared that I'll forget it. Not that I want to remember. I want to forget. I want that more than anything. But if I forget, it'll come back and put someone else in danger. It'll take someone the way it took Jim Paulson. I need to start this at the beginning, or as close to the beginning as I can. Jim and I worked at Reynolds Quarry together. We didn't know each other beyond that. Not really. Sometimes he'd be there when we went out for drinks as a crew, but mostly we just kept to ourselves. I didn't know Jim, but I like to think he was a good man. He had this big belly laugh. No matter how bad the joke was, he'd give a chuckle and slap his knee and tell you you're funnier than Bob Hope. I think he was married. Yes, his wife was named Regina. They had 3 kids with another on the way. I should call her, have Cecilia send over a casserole or something. No woman should go through what she's going through right now. Lillian Pierce worked for the quarry too. The secretary. We all called her Nurse Lily because she was in night school for nursing. She'd also patch us up when we got hurt. I think some of the men came to her with bumps and bruises that didn't really need looking at, but she was professional about the whole thing. Always had a smile and a kind word. Always sent you back to work feeling great. I always wondered why Nurse Lily wasn't married. She was still young, only 30. I know people who would have called her an old maid, but she had time. Her whole life was laid out in front of her. She could have had whatever she wanted. A nursing job, a husband, a sweet little baby. I shouldn't be sentimental over Nurse Lily. I can't get sentimental now. Getting sentimental will only cloud my thinking, prevent me from remembering how it really happened. I think that's what it wants. I think it's filling my head with sweet thoughts of Nurse Lily and Jim Paulson. Like I said, Jim and I weren't good friends. We worked together. It never went beyond that. I'm getting distracted. I keep feeling that if I don't write about it, it won't be real. It is real. It happened. God damn, it happened. There was an explosion. I remember that. When the dynamite went off, Jim and I had laid the wire and were climbing up out of the quarry. I remember pain in the side of my head, ringing in my ears, warm wet blood running down the side of my face. Doc Hanlon says that flying debris ruptured my eardrum. I don't remember that. What I do remember is seeing Jim's face covered in blood, his hands pressed over his eyes, his mouth open in a distant wail. He was next to me, but he sounded like he was 10 miles away. I grabbed him under the arms and dragged him out of the quarry. The other men helped us to Nurse Lily's station. She had this little office in a trailer where she did paperwork and kept first aid supplies. I saw her through the window. She was wearing this little yellow blouse and had her hair tied back with a red ribbon, and I remember thinking that we'd ruin her blouse with all the blood. She jumped up and ran to us, ushering us in. I remember her shoving Jim into a chair. She grabbed her first aid kit, and I remember thinking that it wouldn't be enough. Jim had moved one of his hands, and his left eye was bright red, bathed in blood. The skin around it was shredded, blood streaming down over his face, seeping onto his shirt, and pulling at his collar. Whatever had hit me in the ear had hit him in the eye. I sat and pressed my hand against the side of my head. My ear was a wet, pulpy mess. Nurse Lily had this little radio on her desk. She always had music on. She used to sort of dance to it as she moved around the office. I don't know why I'm writing about that now. I supposed it wants me to. It wants me to think about Nurse Lily dancing instead of what really happened. The music was there until it wasn't. The music stopped. I don't really remember when, but it did. All of a sudden, a low droning sound started instead, sort of like a shrill whine, or maybe a whistle. This long, low note just filled the air. I'll be deaf in that ear for the rest of my life, but that day, my dead ear probably saved me. Nurse Lily was pressing bandages against his face, her mouth moving a mile a minute, as she tried to tell him that things would be okay. The ambulance was on its way. He'd be alright. Jim Paulson just got up and walked out of Nurse Lily's office. He just got up and walked outside. She ran after him. At first, I thought that she was trying to get him to come back, but once she caught up to him, she just walked alongside him. They went outside together. I didn't go after them. I watched from the window as they marched out towards the quarry. I should have gone after them. I shouldn't have let them, but I don't think I could have stopped it. Jim tilted his head back till he was staring up at the sky. His face turned blue. I've seen a face turn blue before. My boy's face turned that exact shade before I realized he was choking, and slapped his back until he threw up chunks of hamburger. But Jim wasn't choking. His skin glowed like the fuzz you see on the TV when the rabbit ears need to be adjusted. It was so bright, so bright. I covered my face, but I could still see it. Jim's mouth opened, and a long, thin wire sprouted up like a vine snaking up through the dirt. The wire was black and thin, barely visible. Little satellites budded along it, blooming like obscene iron flowers. My teeth began aching then. It felt like the fillings were trying to get out of my back teeth. I remember thinking that mine wanted to grow and stretch like his. I swear I felt the metal wiggling. I think I was screaming. More wires were starting to grow out of Jim's head. They sprouted from his ruined eye sockets. I didn't notice Nurse Lily, not at first. She bolted, running forward and clawing at her face, her pretty face. Wires were growing up out of her eyes, and nose, and mouth, stretching up towards the sky. She stumbled forward, clawing and scratching, trying to pull the wires out of her skin. I didn't realize how far away she was. I should have run after her. I should have found a way to stop her. I was so focused on the metal worming up out of her flesh, I didn't fully realize that she was running for the quarry. She threw herself into it. I think maybe she knew what was happening. She knew that something was inside of her, tearing through her flesh in an attempt to get out, violating her from the inside out. She knew that there was no hope, and so she did what Jim Paulson couldn't bring himself to do. She threw herself into the quarry and ended it. God help me. I should have stopped her. I should have saved her. She had her whole life left to live. I can't think that way, not after what happened to her face. That metal was rooted somewhere deep inside of her, ripping its way out. Maybe if it had just been the metal, things would have been alright. But it wasn't just the metal and the wires. There was something else. Something took over Jim Paulson. Something made him different. Something reached into him, yanked out his soul, and took over his body. That's what I tell myself. Anyway, the alternative is worse, because the alternative is that Jim was still in there, watching. As the metal monstrosity piloted his body, he looked so relieved at the end. God forgive me for not helping. God forgive her. They say suicide is a sin, but I think God will forgive Nurse Lily. If there is a God, if he is just an all-knowing, if he truly does love and care for us, then he'll forgive her. But I know deep down that if such a God exists, he never would have let it happen in the first place. May 24th, 1972. Jim Paulson is dead. I've told everyone who will listen. Jim Paulson is dead, and nothing can bring him back. May 25th, 1972. God forgive me. Jim would have done the same for me. I know he would have. May 26th, 1972. I told Doc Hanlon to take a look at my teeth. They haven't been the same since I heard that sound, that whistle. Doc Hanlon says that it looks like my fillings melted and flowed out over my teeth, that my back teeth are covered in metal. He kept asking me how it happened, and I didn't have an answer for him. I begged him to take them out. He balked, telling me that they were still good healthy teeth, but I offered him some cash. And he finally got the pliers and Novocaine. He took out 4 of my teeth, the ones with the fillings. It looks like someone poured metal all over my teeth. I threw them out. I couldn't bear to look at them. Every time I did, I felt that strange twitchy sensation in the back of my mouth, like the teeth were still in there, and they were moving around, trying to reach out for something. My mouth hurts like a son of a gun, but at least they're out of my head. May 27th, 1972. I can't stop thinking about that night. Every time I close my eyes, I see that faint gleam of relief I saw in Jim Paulson's one good eye right before I pulled the trigger and splattered what was left of his brains across the quarry. God help me. God forgive me. It was getting dark when I put down the diary. Mom was calling me down for dinner. I ate in silence, while my parents talked about the most mundane things. Rising onion price, checking the muffler on the family car. They wanted the nightmare to be over, and the best way to do that was to pretend. I couldn't do that. Not yet. While Mom and Dad cleaned up, I got time to sit down with my grandpa out on the porch. There was still a red crack across the horizon, as the last rays of sunlight clung to the distant tree line. I'd brought the diary and sat down next to the old man. I looked up at him. "Grandpa, can we talk?" I asked. He met my gaze and noticed the diary. He shook his head. "No, son." He patted me on the back and grinned. "Get on the other side. Can't hear you." We switched sides, and I gave him the diary. He ran his fingers across the pages, feeling the indent of his pen. "You shouldn't look at people's diaries," he said. "That's secret." "Sorry," I said. I was scared. "About the, kid, Alex." "Yeah." He rubbed my shoulder and put down the diary. "It only feels bad for a while, then it all goes away. You'll forget." "I don't want to." Grandpa turned to me with a grunt. He looked at me like he was trying to read the fine print of a book. "How do we do better if we keep forgetting things?" I said. "We adapt. After a few times, it starts to feel normal. Look at your mom and dad." I peeked through the window. Sure enough, they were just washing dishes like nothing ever happened. To them, this had all been a scare, like seeing a snake in the front yard. But that was all there was to it. One day later, and they were already making plans for the week. "Why didn't you leave?" I asked. "When that happened, in the book, it doesn't want you to. And while you hesitate, it makes you forget. Makes you think it's normal. Did you try?" He looked down at the diary, closing it. "No, son, I didn't. I got us a lemonade." The sun had fallen well below the horizon, but the glow from the house was enough for me to see a smile coming back to his face. "Don't you want to live here?" he asked. "It's beautiful. Houses are cheap. You pay attention to this one thing, and it becomes nothing. Doesn't have to be worse than living in a town with a lot of black bears." I pondered it for a while. Grandpa looked at me intently. Finally, I shook my head. "Bears just eat you. They don't kill what makes you into you. Like with Jim." Grandpa nodded, sipping his lemonade. "Fair point." Mom called me back in to help with the laundry. Grandpa stayed out, running his hands across his diary. His smile was fading. Maybe thinking about Jim for the first time in years dislodged something in his mind. I did my chores, read some comic books, and tried my best to think about something else for a while. By the time I got in bed, my parents were convinced I'd forgotten about the whole thing. Maybe they had, but I hadn't. As Mom tucked me in, Grandpa came up to say goodnight. Mom left us alone for a moment. As she closed the door behind us, he sat down next to me and rubbed my hair. "I know you're scared," he said. "If you could leave this town, would you?" "I don't know. This is important, son. If you stay too long, and if this becomes too normal, you'll stay forever. Right here with Mom and Dad and all the pretty girls in school, and all these nasty nightmares will fade, but they'll still be there, right? Even if I don't remember them." Grandpa sighed and squeezed my hand. "Yeah," he said, "they will. Then I guess I'd want to leave, even if it's just you. Even if you have to leave Mom and Dad and school behind." Even in the dark, I could see the glint in his eyes. What he asked wasn't just a hypothetical, this was something consequential. Still, thinking back on Alex, and how easily people forgot about him, the answer was simple. I could never live here, knowing that death was a whistle away, and knowing I could one day be okay with it. Well, that's terrifying. Yeah, I said, I want to leave. Then we'll fix that, he said. Tomorrow, all right. I barely slept that night. There were too many questions running through my mind. I kept thinking about the diary and the vivid imagery that Grandpa painted. I thought about the look on Alex's face after he'd heard the whistle. I felt the surge of anger in my chest when I smashed that radio. There were so many emotions brewing under my skin, and I couldn't keep track of what to feel. So instead, I just lay awake, shaking, hoping to feel some rest before dawn. By morning, I'd gotten about 3 hours of sleep. Dad went to work, and Mom took me grocery shopping. At lunch, she went out to meet some of her friends, and I got to stay with Grandpa for a few hours. I didn't mind Grandpa, and I went to the park. We found a quiet bench overlooking a duck pond. We just sat there for a while before he handed me an envelope. You know the bus stop at the north side, the one past the malt mill? I nodded, tracing the edge of the envelope. It had an elegant to William text written on the front. There's a bus that goes by there every midnight, Grandpa said, and you can get on that bus and never look back. Where would I go? He handed me a crisp $100 bill. An old friend of mine can meet you at the end station. But do you really want this? Do you really want to leave? The ducks played in the pond, quacking contently. The wind made the reeds whistle a subtle tune. Yeah, then tonight, you go to that bus. You don't tell a soul about it. You just go and don't look back. Take your bike and keep your ear defenders on until you step foot on that bus. Will the whistle let me leave? It will. How? Grandpa gave me a handful of unsalted oats for me to feed the ducks with. I was swarmed by a dozen happy birds, and still the reeds whistled. You know when a predator is the most vulnerable? He asked. No, when it eats. So to get it to look the other way, and for you to get out, it has to eat. I don't get it. It's all there, Grandpa said, tapping the envelope. Don't read it until you get on that bus. Are you coming with me? I can't, son. He smiled. No one can. The day went on as any other. Mom made meatloaf. Dad fell asleep reading the newspaper. It was my time to do the dishes, and I did them better and more thoroughly than I'd ever done before. Everything had this finality to it. I'd hidden Grandpa's letter and the $100 bill in a textbook. I'd stuffed it in my backpack. Later that evening, as I was getting ready for bed, this burning anxiety crept up on me, the same way I felt when my mom used to tell me I could get a single toy from a store. I could never confidently pick one, and this was the same thing. I didn't know what would happen, and I didn't know what would be the best thing to do. Then again, the choice had already been made. The envelope was right there. I'd never really been close to my grandpa up until now, and having him do this for me, whatever it was, seemed like the right thing. So when the clock struck 11 p.m., it was time to go. I used the bathroom, filled up a plastic bottle of water, packed my 2 favorite shirts, and snuck out the door with my ear defenders snug and safe. I got on my bike and followed a side road downtown. From a distance, I could tell something wasn't right. There were too many lights on. This wasn't the kind of town with an active nightlife, except on New Year's Eve. A few cars passed me by, breaking the speed limit. One of them went by so fast I couldn't see who drove it. All I saw was a cracked side window, and a tendril whipping back and forth like a wounded eel. There was a woman screaming. I didn't hear her, but I saw a wide open mouth with a protrusion. Seconds later, I saw the taillights disappear into a ditch. More cracked windows, something red. As I got closer to town, I noticed that it wasn't intense midnight lights that I'd seen, it was fire. I thought about what Grandpa had said, that a predator is at its most vulnerable when it's feeding. This was the feeding. This was when it looked like the entire downtown area losing their minds. I kept moving forward, keeping my eyes on the road. Even so, there were some things that were impossible to look away from. The white tires of my bike were stained with blood, leaving a red trail behind. I kept coughing from the smoke. The body of the guy who owned the hardware store was kneeling in the middle of the street, having set himself on fire. His neck was almost a foot too long, and his mouth was wide open towards the sky. I could see 2 people fighting in a parking garage, one of them beating the other with a meat mallet. They were a tangled mess of clothes and blood, and I couldn't see which one was doing what, but I could see they had a total of 5 arms. People had been rushing for their cars. Some didn't make it. There was this one woman who had lost her left arm, where these long threads of metal had burst out. They stretched back an entire block, slowly wrapping around a light post and pulling her lifeless body back. In one car there was a guy leaning against the horn, while something sharp kept pushing against his mouth from the inside. One man had climbed up and torn open a part of a power line, frying himself, leaving only a mockery of a bird's nest behind, and the charred smile of a skull. Madness. Complete, visceral madness. Finally, as I reached Main Street, I saw Grandpa's favorite pub. There was a raging inferno inside, and I couldn't bear to count the bodies littered on the street. I pedaled past, stopping only to see if I could spot someone inside, and there he was, Grandpa, sitting in his favorite spot. He'd been pierced through the throat by a steakhouse knife. At the table in front of him was a portable shortwave radio, with its volume turned up to max, and a half-finished glass of lemonade. I kept going. I could see shadows of inhumane things dancing in the fire, some of them hobbling in my direction. I couldn't hear them, but I felt the tremble of high-pitched whines struggling against my ear defenders. Dehydrated eyes stared at me, begging for whatever salvation there could be in my death. I turned one last corner down by the malt mill, one last push to get through town, and there I saw what Grandpa really meant by feeding the predator. In the entrance of the mill, there must have been a stampede. People had gotten stuck. What was left of them were eating each other. There was almost nothing human left. The wires squirmed with each other in the bile of their human parts, a nest of worms, rat tails, and black snakes. I could see faces in the black nest, intact human faces with blank eyes. Their mouths were opening and closing as if trying to whisper to me something was winning. The other faces, one by one, were torn apart by wires and consumed into the black storm until only one remained. One human head. The whirlwind of wires slowed, and the thing began to take form. A mess spilled onto the road. I could feel a voice telling me to move, but I could not move until I had seen what we were to become, what this was all about. I wanted to hear what they were whispering to me. A man's head, wrapped in black wires, spiraled to the top of the beating, pulsing mass. The once human mass of wires began to stretch upwards, a coiled cobra raising its head. It began to take a hauntingly, nightmarishly familiar shape. It was a pylon. We were playing with dead bodies in the scrapyard. The head on top, his mouth still opening and closing. He was trying to broadcast a whistle. I realized then I couldn't get past this. I would never leave. What was I thinking? It was too late. He would sing me my lullaby, and I would slumber forever. Past the wall of black, wiry flesh, the bus station stood there. I could make out the outline of a man standing there. What was I thinking? Raise your foot and bring it down in front of you. You are going to walk forward. The flood of wires twitched towards me and I saw my foot move. One foot backing away, the other foot backing to match. You are going to leave. You are going to live. I wish that thought was the one that convinced me. But at that point, my one, preteen, unpoetic thought was, screw this. I hate this town. Seriously, screw this. I bolted across the path, with my eyes shut, and screaming like a banshee. The sound of a whirlwind of wires rose around me as the monster felt me. I heard the zip of wires close to my face, felt sharp fingers scraping on my cheeks, but he couldn't catch me. The 30-second bolt through snapping wires, and there was nothing but air on my cheeks and the whistling of behind me. I snapped my eyes open and turned. The nest was stapled to the spot, their wires increasingly bound to the metal frames. The wires reached out in vain, but receded further and further into the monstrosity. Once rooted, they weren't supposed to leave, I guess, but I was. With joy in this thought, I kept running all the way to the bus station. It was empty. At this point at night, only one other person was there, the last of my grandfather's instructions. The man was standing there. He wore a quarry uniform covered in dirt, hospital mask, and sunglasses, dirty and grimy. He leaned against the wall and stared at me, breathing hard. I couldn't speak out, but I knew it had to be him. He was looking at the monster pylon, building itself out there. The whole scene left him unfazed. He gestured upon the pylon monster in contemplation. They're feeding a lot. There'll be no whistle tonight. In between breaths, I asked, so we can leave, right? They don't just have a seeking whistle. Boy, there's one more independent countermeasure right here, and another down the road. I stumbled closer. Who are you? You've heard of me. Billy. I'm an old friend of your grandpa. I was too close. One hand grabbed my hair as he brought his eyes down to mine. His mouth was full of wires. My ear defenders were snatched and smashed into the ground. Listen, boy, I want you to hear me. Liquid. I could hear the cold, liquid static issuing from Jim's decades dead body. Boy, why leave? Boy, stay with your family. Have a family, grow the family, stay in the farm for the harvest. He grabbed my arms. Under the thin skin, his fingers felt like bags of snakes. I'm leaving. Screw you. I'm leaving. He grinned, and the wires inside his wriggled like snakes. Today's early harvest is acceptable compensation. He leaned in. You can leave, boy. He let go of my arms. I could still feel the wriggling sensation of the wires under his skin. Better thank your grandpa for this. Your strain will be salvaged. Your parents will provide another crop. He raised an arm to the southern road. Walk down that road. Isn't there a bus going there? Why would there be a bus out of here? No one ever leaves. He raised his arms in a gesture encompassing everything. But feel free to come back down when you get the itch. Boy, you never forget your hometown. Bring your family. Listen to the tunes. The thing in Jim's skin stood stock still, grinning with his mouth open, wires writhing inside. He was like that when I left the station, even as I looked back constantly to make sure that would be the last conversation I had in my town. Down the street, I found what I expected out there. A maze of ruined, burned cars blocked the street. Some had their roofs ripped open as something emerged. Others still had half-formed wires enmeshed with bones and vacationing clothes. The radios inside all looked dead and burned out. Still, I got off the road and headed into the wilderness, not rejoining till the sun rose. And the road was empty. I was the only thing moving on that road. I wonder if I was the last. It takes the average person 450 meters and 12 seconds to reach terminal velocity. The building that I was jumping off of was 500 meters tall, to be safe, about the height of the World Trade Center Tower in New York, although it was a whole lot less sturdy than that. 12 seconds feels longer when there's nothing around but the open air. I counted the seconds with single-minded intensity, like I had been trained, refusing to let a single one slip through my fingers. 1, 2, the moment where my feet left the tower was always the most disorienting. I had done this dozens of times, but there was still that moment of instinctive panic where my lizard brain knew that I was about to become nothing more than a smear of blood and viscera. I was hurtling towards the ground at terminal speed without a parachute, and that sort of fear isn't something that just goes away. I love it. Honestly, it's a rush that nothing else can match. 6, 7, I knew I was screaming because of the soreness in my throat, but I couldn't hear it over the sound of my thundering heartbeat. The sky, previously boundless, lost its infinity to the dirt below. 10, 11, I could feel something changing, see the rawness in the wind currents. There was a boom that resonated in my bones, and just before I hit the earth, I shifted just barely out of sync with the rest of the world. 12, free fall. Let's back up a little. Actually, let's back up a lot. All the way to the beginning. The theory of the Big Bang is, at its core, the idea that everything was created in the debris of an explosion that we're still riding the waves billions of years later. But the thing about explosions, especially cosmic ones, is that they can never quite be predicted. The nothingness that came before was ripped apart to create the building blocks of the world. With that came just a bit too much. Pressure rips form, tiny in comparison to the vastness of space, like stretch marks across a hip. Our existence has always been fragile, balanced as it is between the lethal cold above and the burning magma below, held in by something as ephemeral as gravity, all of it contained between the blip of time that is a universe. Those tears just make it possible for humans to topple the precarious stability and end up somewhere else, somewhere that has never known the light of a star. One such tear is in the outback of Australia. It was only discovered because of a skydiver with a faulty parachute. He disappeared into thin air, and his friend caught it on camera, then somehow managed to make people take it seriously. There's probably more somewhere in the world, but we haven't found them yet. Everything beyond the tears we call the shade. By we, I meant me and the rotating crew of scientists, engineers, and politicians that facilitated my trips into the tier. The worst part about the tower was always getting my gear to the top. There wasn't enough room up there for me to get into my suit, so I had to do it on the ground with the help of about a dozen techs. The suit itself was a combination between a spacesuit and an outfit meant for deep sea diving, and it weighed 41 kilograms. It was one big piece with no seams except for the hatch in the back that I stepped in through to reduce the possibility for leaks. Where I was going, the air was not only toxic, nor just passively deadly, it was going to be actively attacking me. Once the techs had sealed me in and done their checks, I had to lug myself and the suit into the elevator and wait the small eternity it took for the rickety thing to haul itself up the tower. It was made as quickly and safely as possible, but building codes had long since been disregarded. As I got higher and higher up, I could feel the building swaying and hear the tortured groaning of the elevator cables. My muscles were burning from the strain of holding up the suit by the time the doors dinged open. When I got to the top, they hooked me up to a tether and directed me to stand at the edge of the roof. The tether took up most of the room because of how long it was, even stacked and coiled up carefully. I was handed a mouse in a small, sealed container and told to attach the container to the belt around my waist. The mouse probably only had an hour or so worth of air, but that didn't much matter. In all likelihood, it wouldn't survive long enough to suffocate. The lab coats were bustling around with the fervor born of having cool science things to do. They cooed over their shiny machines and only spoke to me when they had to, using the radio in my suit because I couldn't hear anything through the thick fabric of it. They did their best to stay away from me. It was subtle, but I noticed it in the way they kept a foot of distance at all times, the lingering glances, the refusal to turn their backs to me. I was the crazy bastard that had willingly gone into the shade dozens of times and then actually came back. They were scared of me. We had only found one tier, but the mathematicians and astronomers were almost certain that there are more somewhere. They thought that the others might not be located on Earth. They might not even be near Earth, but they did probably exist. The RIPs, or at least the one I went through, weren't very cooperative with human science. They didn't exist, according to every instrument that got pointed at them, and the only way to access them was inconvenient. At best, the thing coming in had to be falling at terminal velocity. It had to be fairly small, and there couldn't be a way to stop the fall. If any of those conditions weren't met, the portals just wouldn't open. He would fall straight through the empty air and splatter to pieces on the rocks below. The most interesting part, to the scientists, was that the RIP somehow knew if someone had a way to stop their fall. They weren't sure, initially, why the tether didn't prevent me from going into the shade, but the current working hypothesis is that since the cord isn't strong enough to hold me up or catch me, it doesn't count. It had been tested over and over with dozens of different types of equipment: gliders, jetpacks, bungee cords, even Spider-Man-type web shooters. Every time, the tiers stayed stubbornly closed, but there seemed to be no way onward. They couldn't exactly throw someone off the building with no way to catch them. At that time, I was working as an intern to the actual scientists, and I very much wanted to jump off the building. I had always been an adrenaline junkie. I didn't have much to live for anyways, and it sounded like fun. So when the scientists had all gone home for the night, I had grabbed one of the hazard suits, some rope and gear, and a buddy who was just as lacking in common sense as me. At that point, we were drunk as hell, and even when confronted with the long drop down, I was still absolutely ready. My buddy took more convincing, but eventually, he came around too, helped along with a couple more beers. We rigged up an amateur pulley system, tied the rope around my chest and the loops of the hazard suit, and then I jumped before I could think better of it. 12 seconds. That's long enough to realize your stupidity, and almost long enough to regret it. My body was being pulled apart like taffy, my organs were shattering under the weight of infinite dimensions, and then I was in the shade. It's impossible to describe exactly what it's like there. It was the endlessness of the deep ocean evident, and the horizon line between sky and sea, or maybe the place where lost socks go, or the heartbreak of losing a child, or the thousands quilt squares piled around Grandma's house that she said she'd get to later, or the way midnight coffee just tastes different than morning coffee. It was like nothing I'd ever known before. I was addicted from the very first glimpse. I only caught a peek of it that time, before my buddy saw me blink out of existence, panicked, and pulled on the rope as hard as he could, slinging me back into the real world, where I fell onto the ground, slowed by the strange physics of the shade. He reported it later as somewhat like an optical illusion. He didn't close his eyes, he didn't look away, but I went fuzzy, and then I was gone so seamlessly that he didn't realize what happened for several seconds. At that point, the tower didn't have cameras. The only interesting thing about the building was its proximity to a phenomenon that couldn't even be accessed yet, and security was assumed to be a waste of money, so I had the option to say nothing, and in all likelihood I would never be found out. But I wanted to go back in, and even in the short moment that I'd spent there, I could feel the air eating away at my protective outfit. Afterward, I'd seen the marks where the fabric had decayed. I knew that I'd need money and resources if I wanted to go back. I told the head scientist what I had discovered, and after a good 2 hours of yelling, it was agreed that I would be the one to go back in the shade. Frankly, I think I was the only person who wanted the job. I could hear a person talking to me over the radio in my suit as soon as I fell through, but I couldn't respond. The first couple of moments are always disorienting, and I was too busy trying to remember my own sentience to parse the vast stream of words being thrown at me. I've been describing it with metaphors because it isn't just a physical place. I perceive it through thoughts just as much as I do through sight. But I think the closest thing on Earth is the open ocean at night, when the sky and the sea merge together in the distance, and everything is completely dark because the stars are covered by clouds. When I'm in the shade, I fall towards the horizon line forever, skimming over the waves and dipping my fingers into the water. Ben, the man on the radio, said, "Ben, come in. This is Miller. Talk to me." "I'm not Ben," I giggled, the adrenaline rush making me giddy. "I'm Agent Splat." There was a long moment of judgmental silence, and I cleared my throat awkwardly before Miller seemed to decide to just move on. "Are you in the shade?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. To me, it felt like I was just floating, but I knew from the readings on my suit and tether that I was in fact falling, very fast, and getting faster every second. Miller made a sound of approval. "Okay, then release the mouse when you feel ready." I acknowledged him and unhooked the compartment from my belt. It was made out of clear glass, so I could see the mouse inside, small and white-furred. The way it cowered against the floor of its cage made me feel slightly guilty. I'd had a couple pet mice as children, and I knew that something bad would happen when I opened the container, even if I didn't know exactly what it would be. Still, I had a job to do, so I pressed the button on the side and exposed the mouse to the shade. Instantly, its fur started to decay, flaking away from its body. When all the hair was gone, it was like the shadows around me reached out and sank into its skin. It squeaked in terror, black streaking across its skin like a lightning, the muscles under its skin bulging and contorting. I could see shadows in its breath every time it exhaled, its tiny chest heaving. It turned to look at me, its red eyes rimmed with the darkness of the shade, and crumbled into dust. The dust billowed out and settled onto my gloved hands. "Report," Miller asked, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Are you hurt?" My hands were shaking, sending up little plumes of dead mouse dust. "I'm okay. The mouse, it's dead." "Obviously," Miller said, his concern overwhelmed by irritation. "We knew that would happen going in." "Details, Ben, right?" I took a deep breath, which wasn't very grounding, considering the canned air. I was breathing. It sort of twisted, like its skin was the wrong shape for its organs, and then it dissolved. Miller said something else, but I didn't hear it because I was staring at the black powder that used to be a mouse. I had thought it was just on top of my suit, but now that I looked at it, it seemed to be embedded in it. No, not embedded, I realized. It was actually abrading the cloth, insinuating itself in the fibers, and it was still moving, still trying to get to my skin. "Pull me out," I said, shaking my arms wildly because I couldn't think of anything else to do. "Get me out of here now." To his credit, Miller didn't ask questions. He just acted. Like in space or the sea, it's easier to move things in the shade. The tether, which would have snapped on Earth, was more than sufficient to pull me back up. The process of leaving is very different from going in. Just the intention of exiting and the cessation of falling seems to be enough, with no regards to how far I actually fell into the shade. It only took a couple seconds of the scientists back home pulling me up with the tether for the world to shift again, but they were the longest seconds of my life. I could do nothing but wait as my suit got thinner and then tore entirely an instant before the world shifted again, and I was back on Earth. I curled into a ball on the ground, getting dirt all over my suit and screaming from the pain. I spent 3 months in the hospital The doctors had never seen injuries like mine before, and they had no idea how to treat me. The wounds were worst around my hands, where the air of the shade had entered, but they covered my entire body. They felt like burns, and they came with vertigo so severe I couldn't stand up, and waves of dark dread that traveled up from my fingertips. They looked like shadows shifting under my skin, but were strangely flat, like a tattoo. I was kept hydrated and given pain medicine. That barely helped, but other than that there wasn't anything that could be done for me. I just had to heal on my own, which I did, laboriously slowly. The shadows never went away entirely, but the pain did, eventually, and they disappeared from everywhere except my hands, wrists, and fingers. It might be more accurate to say that they collected around my hands, pulling under my nails, and making bracelets around my wrists. My hospital bills were all paid for, and in return I spent hours undergoing every test under the sun. They didn't exactly keep me prisoner, but they locked the door during the night. As soon as I could move on my own, I snuck out of my bed at midnight and wrapped my fist in blankets. Then I punched the window as hard as I could. I felt the impact up my arm, which was still shaky and weak, and the glass barely cracked, but I kept going. I was done with the shade. I wanted nothing else to do with it. The hospital was built under the assumption that people would want to stay inside, not run away, so it was easy enough to leave without being seen. I withdrew my meager amount of savings, covered my hands with long gloves, and got the cheapest train ticket I could find. I just wanted to get as far away as I could. The train thundered across dry dirt, over a small creek, around a mountain, and with every mile, I felt safer. Soon enough, the train went dark, all the other passengers settling down to sleep. I couldn't sleep, seized by the fear that if I closed my eyes, I'd end right back at that tower, staring over the edge, and deciding to jump. My palms itched in my gloves, irritated by the coarse material, looking out the train window at the endless flat landscape that flew by almost as fast as I saw it. I could almost imagine I was looking out at the shade. As I thought that, I felt my fingers beginning to burn, a pale imitation of the way they'd felt on the day that the shade got into me. I rubbed my palms together and did my best to ignore it, but the burning kept getting worse and worse, creeping past my wrists towards my elbows. After a quick look around to make sure that the other passengers were asleep, I finally gave in and peeled off my gloves. The shadows under my skin were swirling, more active than they had been in weeks. Then they actually pulled up off of me, becoming smoky three-dimensional tendrils instead of just laying flat. I tried to push them back in by flattening them against my thigh, but they just spread out in a halo around my hand, then popped right back up again. When I moved it, they twisted around each other, forming a vaguely circular shape right above my hand. I felt that vertigo that had haunted me during my recovery, and then, with a pop, a mouse appeared in the center of my palm. Shrieking, I threw it across the room, and I swear it sent me a look of utter betrayal an instant before it phased out of existence again. By the time people started looking over at me to figure out why I was screaming, the shadows were back to their usual state on my skin. Someone asked if I was okay. I nodded vaguely in their direction and huddled further down in my seat, wrapping my arms around myself. I was hoping that if I just got far enough away, it would all stop. When that train ended, I got on a bus, then another train, eventually ending up in Brisbane. I got the first room for the night that I could, and decided that I was going to hide in the bed until the world stopped trying to kill me. When I woke up, the mouse was on the pillow next to me, fast asleep, and my shadows were retreating into my skin. Its fur was standing straight up, like it had been shocked with static electricity, and it was covered in the same shadows that I was. I've always been told that my curiosity is going to get me killed one day. I poked the mouse with my finger. It predictably bit me. "Oh, screw you," I said, cradling my injury to my chest. The mouse closed its eyes and went back to sleep. The damn thing was still unfairly cute. "I guess you need a name if you're gonna keep showing up." The mouse didn't offer an opinion. After an extremely awkward glance, I discovered that she was female. "How about Nibbles? You certainly like to bite." After watching Nibbles for long enough that I was sure she wasn't going to do anything interesting, I got up to take a shower. There wasn't anything else to do. When I came out of the bathroom, Nibbles was gone again. She kept showing up throughout the next few days. I spent them trying my best not to think too hard and get stuck in fear, and honestly, I started to look forward to her visits. She was a vicious little thing, but she was also fluffy and warm, and she made me feel less alone. Her favorite spot to nap was on my shoulder, cuddled up against my neck. She stayed longer each time, and the portal that formed with her arrival got bigger. I had fled away from the rip because I thought that if I left, I could just go back to a normal life. Obviously, that wasn't happening, and so on the 8th day since Nibbles started appearing, I bought a burner phone and called Miller. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Just when I was starting to think that he wouldn't pick up, I heard the buzz of the line connecting. "This is Andrew Miller, speak." I sighed, long and silent. "Hey, Miller, it's Ben. There's some stuff going on that I think y'all would be interested in. Where are you? I'm going to send a plane." He was back to his clipped and cold persona. "Brisbane." I was cringing away from the phone, like I was about to be called to the principal's office. "How did you get to?" "Never mind. Just go to the airport. I'll text you instructions," he said. I wasn't ready to give up that easily. I think you forgot the magic word." "Pretty pleased with the cherry on top," he said, deadpan. I laughed and hung up on him. The plane, when it arrived, was tiny and slightly rusted, with only enough room for me, Miller, and the pilot. And by that I mean just me and Miller, because Miller was the pilot. He gave me headphones so that I could hear him through the ambient noise that such small planes always came with, and then proceeded not to talk to me for the whole flight. Nibbles appeared 30 minutes into the flight. I was used to the whole routine by now, but Miller was so shocked he almost crashed. "What the hell is that?" he asked. I scooped her up in my arms. "She's Nibbles." "That does not answer my question." I rolled my eyes, which he didn't see because he was focused on flying the plane. "The mouse that you had me release in the shade. She's been visiting me." Miller glanced over again, and his eyes widened. "Does that usually happen?" The shadows weren't going back into my skin like normal. Instead, they got bigger, twining around my arms. They brushed over my seat and the control panel in front of me, devouring everything they touched. "Land the plane," I said. "Now." He banked hard, sending me rattling against the wall, and sent us toward the ground at full speed. My seatbelt dissolved, and something important must have been destroyed because the plane started shaking. The door next to me, protecting me from the open air, was disappearing as I watched. "Almost there," Miller murmured. The ground came into view. On a particularly hard jolt, the door finally fell away, and I went with it. I caught a glimpse of Miller reaching out for me, panic in his eyes, and then the only thing I could see was the sky. Free fall. 12 seconds. So much time to think, but my mind was empty. I closed my eyes before I could hit the ground. The shade opened around me and crawled into my pores. I waited to die. I expected to die, or at the very least to experience the same burning pain. But a moment passed, then another, and when I finally peeled open my eyes, I was still alive, hurtling through the shade with no tether. I fell for a meaningless amount of time. I got thirsty, then hungry, but never to the point of pain or death. I got lost in the falling. When the first image came, I thought it was a mirage, but then it happened again. They were just flashes, snapshots of other worlds. Crystal trees, burning air, dinosaurs that talked like humans, a civilization on the brink of collapse, another just beginning to grow, fields of animals grown like wheat, a wall bisecting the earth, colonization of the universe by a race of lizards, wastelands, and paradises, all connected by the shade. I was crying, sobbing with my eyes wide open. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, it ended. I landed at the foot of the tower, unharmed. I don't think this is where it ends, though, or at least it doesn't have to end here. Nibbles just appeared, and this time the portal she came through isn't closing, and it's bigger than ever. Big enough that I could fit through if I crouched. I've always been filled with wanderlust, always been a bit of an adrenaline junkie. It's what drove me to jump off the tower in the first place. My mom called it suicidal curiosity, and lack regard for my own full self. She may have been right, but the shade chose me for some reason, and after I finish writing this, I'm going to walk through that portal, and then I guess I'll see how far I can fall.